Chapter 134. At present, the civil war in the Lion Kingdom of the Alliance of Northern Kingdoms was still in full swing. At the same time, the black dragon that had come out of nowhere had silently replaced the mother of poisons as the new master of Green Capital. Iradia's third era, year 1633. Nina returned to his high chair and sat with the other young nobles. He sipped the wine in his cup, and the sweet and fruity aroma of the summer red wine made his lips curl into a faint smile. The main hall of Kaki's castle was filled with cold air. The underground ice cellar was doing its best to cool down and dispel the heat of the northern dry season. The surroundings were filled with the fragrance of roasted meat and freshly baked bread. The black stone walls of the hall were filled with the banners of the Brindle family and their supporters. Indeed, the young nobles present were the heirs of the various nobles. Their heads had followed Count Brindle to the front lines and left their children in Kaki to rest, play, and enjoy themselves. Of course, they were also hostages in a sense, and he, Nina Brindle, was responsible for keeping an eye on them. At the same time, he had to control the logistics and guard the rear. Nina did not accompany his father to the front lines like his younger brother. Compared to leading an army and scheming, Nina preferred to do business, hunt, and socialize. He was a conservative nobleman who valued peace and wealth. Guarding the rear was exactly what he wanted. His father agreed to his request. But recently, Nina had been worried. The reason was simple. Brindle's family had run out of money. This embarrassing problem should not have happened. Brindle's family had been guarding the borders of Kaki for hundreds of years. Even though they were not as wealthy as a country, they were still extremely wealthy. How could they run out of money just like that? But the truth was, the reason was war. Once a war was launched, resources and wealth would be depleted at a speed comparable to burning. In fact, it might even be faster than burning. Nina estimated that even if she hired 100 farmers to burn their wealth day and night, they would not be able to deplete all their wealth in a short period of time. But such a large amount of wealth was completely used up in the war. A few years ago, his younger brother Roy went crazy and went to the wilderness to fight a black dragon that came out of nowhere. That battle used up all of the wealth that the Brindle family could produce in 2 years. After 7 years of rest and recuperation, they finally managed to recover. As a result, civil war broke out. Other than the daily expenses, there was also the maintenance of the soldiers, the forging of arrows, the production of oil bombs, and the provision of supplies. None of these things did not cost money. Duke Lionheart had the entire Lion Kingdom as his backing, while the Brindle family only had the Kaki border and a group of small nobles behind them. Moreover, there was a banquet held every month in the Lord's castle at the back. Feeding these hostages was not a small expense, but it had to be done. The dignity of the nobles could not be neglected. For months after the war started, Nina realized that she was embarrassingly short of money. However, the front line was still asking for money again and again. God knew how they managed to win this war. Didn't they say that they were winning? How did they end up in a situation where they couldn't even make ends meet? What a headache. In the hall, a minstrel was strumming a harp and singing a ballad in a low voice. Her voice was sweet and her face was beautiful, but she could not be heard clearly under the noise of toasting, clattering of dishes, and drunken conversation. But Nina Brindle was not in a good mood at all. This monthly banquet had already lasted for 4 hours, but he still could not think of a way to get money. His worries grew with each passing day. After all, his father's orders could not be disobeyed. "I invite you to drink with me, my lord." Under the encouragement of the young nobles beside him, Nina drank another cup of wine. He was usually very happy to be in their company, bragging with relish about the war, hunting, and rare events that happened in the Southern Empire. But today, Nina was really not in the mood. The banquet was coming to an end, and the female attendants were patted on the buttocks by the young nobles, leaving a shy smile on their faces. Nina looked on coldly from the side, his thoughts wandering. Have you seen him? Look at the way he speaks. He heard someone talking in a low voice. Even though the hall was noisy, he did not know why, but he could clearly hear the person's whisper. "I'm guessing that he must be a big shot. He's a great noble." Nina heard another person chiming in. a great noble who can do well in every country on the continent. He raised his head and looked towards the source of the voice. At the end of the long table, two sons of knights were whispering to each other. Their expressions of amazement and envy made his heart skip a beat. The two men's whispers made Nina interested. He picked up a cup of wine and walked toward the two men. "Are you satisfied with today's dinner? Both of you?" Nina raised his cup at the end of the long table. My lord." The two men who were engrossed in their whispers came back to their senses and saw Nina standing beside them. They were rather flattered and fearful. Their status was worlds apart from Nina's. As the sons of ordinary knights, even though they had the opportunity to sit at the banquet table, under normal circumstances, they would not be able to talk to the host here. "We're very satisfied. The Fry family is very grateful for the Brindle family's care for us." Fortunately, they were, after all, small nobles who had some education and were not rural farmers. They quickly reacted and bowed. "Then, please allow me to be presumptuous." Nina bowed slightly in return, showing the good manners of a noble. At the same time, he said with a smile, "I am very interested in your topic just now. I wonder if you have the time to introduce it to me?" The two men looked at each other, not knowing why the heir of a count was suddenly interested in some unknown news. "You mean Count Tangerine?" One of the heir of a viscount suddenly interrupted and leaned over. He first answered Nina's question, then turned around and asked the other two, "Is that right?" "Yes, my lord." The two men replied. "We were talking about this person earlier." "Why, my dear Lord Beauchamp, do you know something about this?" Nina thought to himself. He was just asking casually and did not have much expectations. How much knowledge could the sons of two knights have? The great noble they were talking about was probably not a big shot. But at this time, the heir of a viscount interrupted, as if he also knew about this matter. And from his mouth, the word count popped out. This made Nina really interested. "It seems that you have been very busy recently." The heir of a viscount named Beauchamp accompanied Nina and sat down at a small table. The waitress immediately served wine and dessert. "That person has recently become famous in khaki." "Why do you say that?" Chapter 135. As you know, the Khaki Hill is the most dazzling pearl of the Northern Alliance. Lord Beauchamp complimented. "This land of riches connected to the vast wilderness is a paradise for adventurers and an abode for profit-seekers. Poets sing for it and dancers dance for it. Every day, countless outsiders pour in here." "We all know." Nina nodded. As the last transit station and supply point for humans to go to Therangobi, Mostel Grand Canyon, Wild Wilderness, and Green City, the flow of people in the Khaki Hill was unquestionable. Countless confident and smart-alecky adventurers poured in here, either forming teams or being hired to go to unpredictable places that were neither orderly nor secure in an attempt to get rich overnight. Since that's the case, what happens next is logical. The Lord took a sip of tea and said, "He came to the Khaki Hill some time ago. The him I mentioned is Count Tangerine. It seems that this person likes the scenery here very much and intends to settle down here." "Where is he?" "In the freedman's residential area outside the Lord's castle." "No wonder you don't know. You have been busy recently, so you naturally don't pay attention to what happens outside the aristocratic area." "No, that's not right." Nina frowned. "You said that he is a count, a great aristocrat? How could he condescend to live in the slums? Is he just a fallen aristocrat in name?" "We thought so at the time." Beauchamp shrugged. "But that's where the beauty lies. Did you know that this person bought all the freedmen's residences in the Flower Lane in the Torres district?" "Bought all of them?" Nina repeated in a murmur, and then asked, "Flower Lane? That's a good place in the outer city. But I remember that there are a few merchants' shops there, as well as the residences of some knights' heirs. Did they give it up so easily? As long as you are willing to spend money, there is nothing that cannot be bought. Lady Nina, I believe you know this better than I do. There are indeed some small twists and turns in the process. For example, your Knight Fry family, out of nobility, they asked for 160 gold, which is 50% higher than the market price. But guess what? That person directly bid 320 gold. As he said this, the Lord stood up and shouted towards the corner behind the long table, Little Fry, don't you agree? The abrupt question and undisguised sarcasm made the two young men whom Nina had approached feel embarrassed and angry. However, they had no choice but to smile and nod immediately. That's how it is. Nina raised her glass to them to ease their awkwardness. Even in front of these small aristocrats, her etiquette was flawless. Is he really a big shot who spent a lot of money? Millionaire? That's right. That person ordered the servants to demolish all the civilian residences in the Flower Lane and renovate them. In just a few days, a beautiful and magnificent garden mansion was built. Beecham clicked his tongue in praise. There are many people who have become rich overnight, but most of them have no taste or self-restraint. In our eyes, they're just despicable nouveau riche. But this person is different. Whether it is the taste or the layout of his mansion, it is not inferior to the Brendel family's mansion. As he said this, the Lord stood up and bowed slightly to express his apology. Please forgive my rudeness and presumptuous comparison, but with my shallow knowledge, the most elegant and luxurious mansion I have ever seen is my Lord's exquisite mansion. I can only compare the two. Where did he come from? Since he is a noble and is preparing to settle down here, how could he ignore basic etiquette and visit the owner of this place first? Nina showed some dissatisfaction at the right time. Perhaps the customs are different. I heard that he is a noble from a free trade city-state in the central region. Perhaps in those cities, their customs are different from ours. Beecham smiled and explained to the stranger. Yes, in the absence of conflicts of interest and emotional entanglements, who doesn't love the rich? Heard? Nina keenly grasped the key point of the matter and asked about the person's origin. Heard from whom? Well, that's what people say. Some of the small nobles standing beside the Count's eldest son interrupted. Everyone knows. Lord Beecham also nodded and then added, You will know when you see him. The Southerners look different from us Northerners. Those beautiful Southerners stroll leisurely in the city's tree-lined avenues every day, leisurely strolling in the green forests. They are not the same kind of people as the strong and brave Northerners under the scorching sun. Are you complimenting him? A stranger? Nina continued to ask. No matter what, Lord Beecham said, Count Tangerine is indeed an elegant person. Besides, I have seen him from afar once, so it's not that we don't know each other. Oh yes, he also seems to have a little elf as a pet. A little elf? Or a forest fairy? At this moment, Nina's heart could not help but palpitate as she asked subconsciously. This meant that the forest fairy had left a deep impression on him. According to his brother Roy, the black dragon who was hostile to the Brendel family had a forest fairy as a dependent. Forest fairy? Oh, now that you mention it, I remember that it is indeed a forest fairy, not a little elf. Lord Beecham patted his head and said with a smile, Look at how ignorant I am. A little elf is an elemental creation, and a forest fairy has a physical form. That is indeed a forest fairy. At first, Nina's polite face changed color, and a faint blush flashed across his pale face. He subconsciously thought that the black dragon had snuck into the Kaji territory and was preparing to pose a great threat to the Brendel family. He wanted to immediately inform Roy and Brendel at the front lines to request for the army to return. But soon he calmed down. It's impossible. Nina's clenched fists slowly relaxed, and at the same time, he laughed self-deprecatingly in his heart. The true dragons were not fools. Even the most stupid and lazy of the Penishade dragons would not carelessly reveal their symbolic things in front of others. This kind of low-level disguise could be seen through even by a 5-year-old child. According to Roy Brendel, the black dragon was extremely smart and cunning. If it wanted to sneak into the Kaji territory, it would have taken this into consideration. Moreover, Lord Beecham had mentioned before that the Count spent a lot of money and did not hesitate to buy all the houses in the Flower Lane. He also spent a lot of money to rebuild the elegant garden. This made Nina completely relieved. Even if the Penishade Dragon Queen Tiamat were to descend and pinch the necks of the Penishade dragons with her claws, they would not do such a thing. Treasures and gold coins were their lives. No matter what, he should pay a visit to the so-called Count. Perhaps this trip could also solve the Brendel family's embarrassing problem. Nina looked forward to it. Chapter 136. The next day, Nina Brindle, dressed in a black ceremonial robe and wearing decorative carbon iron gauntlets, boarded a luxurious four-wheeled carriage with a team of guards and servants, and left Kaki's lord's castle early in the morning. He went to the Flower Alley in the Toryford district to visit Count Tangerine. The gate of the garden mansion was as busy as a marketplace. Outside the new metal fence, merchants gathered together and chatted with each other. Countless mercenaries were looking forward to it. The messengers of several mercenaries were also lingering around, unwilling to leave. Of course, there were also outlaws. Many vagrants and bandits were hiding in the shadows, staring maliciously at the scenery in the garden. Why are there so many people? Nina was puzzled. Seeing this scene, he did not immediately enter the Flower Alley. Instead, he sent a servant to investigate. Soon, the servant came back with a report and inquired about the situation. This noble was said to be from a free trade city-state in the central region. He was quite rich and extremely generous, and became famous in a short period of time. However, in a place like Kaki's border, wealth was not a good reputation, and it immediately attracted the covetous eyes of countless people. When Count Tangerine first arrived, under the temptation of wealth, many rats that usually hid in the dark swarmed over. These vagrants and bandits joined forces, and relying on their numbers, they actually planned to directly rush into the garden and rob it. In the end, more than 100 people did not even get to see the Count's face, and they could not even get close to the noble's mansion. The Count's servants were quite valiant, just like a well-trained elite army. With only 30 servants, they cut off the limbs of these vagrants and bandits and threw them into the sewage river. Under the deterrence of blood, the bandits with evil intentions did not dare to act rashly. However, they still lingered around, looking for an opportunity. As for the mercenaries, they were attracted by the Count's generosity. It was said that the commission of the Count's servants was 10 times that of ordinary dangerous mercenaries. Serving this noble for a year was equivalent to a lifetime of hard work. These people gathered here were all eager to serve the Count. Although the Count's servants had proven their valiance, the men still hoped that they could be the lucky ones to be the first to be hired. As for the merchants, they were not in the same world as the bandits and mercenaries. They were waiting for the manager of the mansion to come and purchase goods. It was said that if that person needed something, even if the price was 50% higher than the market price, as long as there was stock, the manager of the mansion would immediately agree to buy it. So, this Earl Tangerine has only been here for a few days, but he has already gained a lot of support in the outskirts of Kaki. Nina raised her eyebrows and asked in a loud voice. The attendants didn't dare to respond. Young Master Nina was very well-mannered, but his raised eyebrows already showed that he was faintly angry. The guest overshadowed the host. He cursed in his heart. After a long while, Nina finally suppressed the anger in his heart. He calmed himself down and put on a gentle smile. He was what people called an old aristocrat. He was particular about being polite and maintaining honor and dignity, at least on the surface. "Go and knock on the door," he said. The carriage moved forward slowly. The Brindle family's flag caused the crowd outside the mansion to fall silent. They immediately retreated, but did not leave and continued to observe the alley. When the attendants went forward to inquire, Nina also looked inside. From the carriage, he could see the outer walls of the mansion, a corner of the inner garden, and servants wearing uniforms coming and going. It had to be said that if the layout of the garden was personally arranged by that noble, then his aesthetic sense was indeed superior. Whether it was the layout or the mood or the choice of flowers and plants, as well as the arrangement of the fountain, Nina Brindle, who was born noble, could not find any fault with it, and even praised it. It was like the design of the empire where the sun never sets. Nina was secretly shocked. He yearned for the empire in the south that never sets, so he had read books about it. Nina did not know that at the same time he was looking at the garden, a pair of eyes was also looking at him. The Brindle family's flag is finally here. Caesar stood in front of the window and studied the visitor from a distance. He was more careful than Nina when he was looking at the mansion and garden. This guy is not Roy. He made a disappointed gesture and began to walk back and sit down again. This face is definitely that of a noble. His cheekbones are wide and protruding, his forehead is high, his eye sockets are deep, and his mouth is thin and thin. This guy is somewhat similar to Roy, but he looks older. Is he here? The little girl Luna was flying up and down around him. She had changed out of her favorite emerald green knee-length dress and put on a dark black gauze dress. She said excitedly, Caesar, Caesar, I'm a little nervous. How should I behave? Should I change my personality? Should I be firm and cold? Or should I be humble and timid? You just have to be the same as before. Caesar patted her head. After using his human disguise, it was much easier to do this action. These humans have never seen you before. How would they know what the forest fairy beside the black dragon is like? And you don't need to show your face. Just show your face and show your existence. Bringing the forest fairy with him would not arouse the black dragon's suspicion and expose his disguise. Instead, it would make them believe that he had nothing to do with the black dragon. This was a reverse thinking, and Caesar was very familiar with it. At this time, the servant disguised as a shape-shifting monster came to report. Invite him in. Remember, invite. Don't forget human etiquette. Caesar agreed. Please don't worry, my lord. The shape-shifting monster retreated. When Nina Brindle walked into the guest hall, his footsteps were heavy and stiff, as if he was meeting a prince. He really could not guess what kind of person the other party was, so it was more appropriate to maintain a dignified manner for the first meeting. Other than the red velvet scarf around his neck, the Earl's eldest son was dressed in black from head to toe. Only the buttonholes of his inner shirt were inlaid with thin red rims, which complemented the scarf and showed off his exquisite aristocratic style. Greetings, sir. Although Nina Brindle had great self-control, when he bowed to return the greeting, he could not help but look at the other party with obvious curiosity. The other party's attire was extremely simple, but even the most picky old noble would not be able to find a single flaw. His entire body exuded an elegant taste. His upper garment, gloves, and boots were all made by masters, and the quality was extremely expensive. Most of them were made of the highest quality buckskin. As he spoke, Nina played a trick. He did not call the other party count, but used the general term sir. This would lay the groundwork for him to find out the other party's identity later. This was the most important thing, and the purpose of his visit was this. Nina would definitely not have too much contact with a person of unknown origin. Even if he ruled out the possibility that the Black Dragon was in hiding, the other party could still be a spy sent by Duke Lionheart. So this time, Nina did not think of anything else, and only wanted to find out the other party's background. Caesar also knew this. If he wanted to come into contact with Roy and the other core members of the Brindle family, he estimated that he would have to go through this obstacle first. This guy had thought of using force to threaten him, but after thinking about it for a while, Caesar gave up on this idea. With the Brindle family's performance in the last war, if the Black Dragon's true identity was exposed, it was hard to say if force would be effective. Chapter 137. Welcome to my humble abode, sir. Please take a seat. Nina was invited to sit. The nobleman opposite him was not old, but he had a dignified appearance. His eyes were sharp and full of vitality. His tall nose was almost level with his forehead, and he had a pure southern nose. His teeth were as white as pearls. He did not have a beard, and his hair was short and black. He was not tall, but he was well-proportioned. His hands and feet were small, his skin was white, and his clothes were well-fitting. Lord Beecham was right. He was indeed a Southerner. Nina thought and labeled him as a Southerner. At the same time, he said, "Please allow me to introduce myself, sir. My name is Nina, and I come from the Brindle family. I am also the lord of this humble abode." "So it's the lord. I apologize for any offense." Caesar pretended to be surprised and bowed again. "According to the customs of your country, I should have visited you as soon as I entered the town. But as you know, the long journey is really a very difficult thing. My attendants and I are really too tired. We can't wait to settle down and rest. I was going to visit you after taking care of everything, but I didn't expect to break the rules and let you visit me first. I'm really sorry." Although he said sorry, Nina looked at him with a completely righteous attitude. There was not a hint of guilt in his eyes, but only the arrogance and condescension of a great noble. Could it be that he really is a descendant of a great noble family? Nina could not guess, so he could only follow the conversation. To be honest, if you don't know the customs of the Northland Alliance, you don't have to apologize at all. But if I may ask, sir, are you really from the faraway central free trade city-state, as the rumors say? Absolutely. Caesar nodded without hesitation. Please allow me to confess. This is also to apologize for any inappropriate actions I may have done in the future. I am a citizen of Alanda, and I come from one of the 9 free trade city-states. This is the first time I have come to the Northland Alliance, and I am completely unfamiliar with the way of life here. Until now, I am almost still living the life of the South. As you know, as a new trading city-state in the central region, Elantra is poles apart from the fine traditions of the northern kingdoms. Therefore, if you find anything inappropriate in my words and actions, please forgive me. A good disguise had to be filled in with enough details. For this, Caesar had done his homework and made perfect preparations. When talking about the background, he was not afraid at all, because this time, not only was this guy seeking revenge, but he was also brewing another plan. Not only did he want to bury the Brindle family, he also wanted to secretly replace all the members of the Roy family with shapeshifters to create a new Brindle family, allowing them to live happily again. Yes, this was Caesar's ambition. He wanted to take control of the khaki border and turn it into his puppet country without starting a war with the humans. If he succeeded, there was no doubt that would be of great help to Black Dragon in the future. In the future, there would be an endless stream of resources pouring into Blackwing's nest. Blackwing's nest. Luna and the leaders of the other clans came up with a new name for the Green Capital. This name has been approved by the Black Dragon Lord. You said that you came from a trading city-state and entered Rhine Khaki of the Northern Kingdoms, but this barren land is not a place to enjoy. Nina said at the same time. She raised her head. Contrary to her previous courtesy, she looked directly into the man's eyes rather impolitely. Then, please allow me to ask, why are you here, and what is your purpose? He raised his eyebrows and straightened his face. His gentle demeanor was no longer there, showing the dignity of the Lord of Khaki. He stared at the face of the man in front of him, as if trying to find a flaw in his face. It seems that your so-called enjoyment is not the same as mine. However, Caesar's tone was not unnatural at all. He smiled and said, I consider myself a traveler. To me, enjoying different scenery is a kind of enjoyment. I've drunk wine alone at Elantra Falls, and I've also partied with the dwarves in a foreign town. I've led an army to war in Kai Mohan, and I've also walked alone in the Elven Forest. I've courted the clam girls on the coast, and I've also danced with the fox singers. I've presented a long sword to the head of the Federation of Free Trade, and I've also presented a pearl to Emperor Enrique of the Unfallen Empire. Caesar, who had already prepared a draft, said smoothly, After all, we're not long-lived species like the giant dragons. Iradia is so big. Why don't you take a look at it? Nina was stunned and looked at Tangerine in surprise. This person was either telling the truth or he was crazy. However, the structure and knowledge shown in his words were beyond the reach of ordinary people. In addition, the noble's performance in the rumors made Nina more inclined to believe the first possibility. Of course, she cannot be completely sure. As she was stunned, Nina's tough tone softened, but she still grasped a key point and continued to ask, The gifts you presented to the 2 kings are definitely treasures that ordinary people can't imagine. So, did the head of Tashimu and Emperor Enrique give you anything in return? According to the customs of Iradia, if the visitor's status was high enough and the gifts were valuable enough, the kings were likely to give gifts in return. However, if this guy was talking nonsense, of course, Caesar nodded matter-of-factly. The 2 kings are supreme in power, so naturally they would not be stingy. The head of Tashimu gave me another long sword in return, and Emperor Enrique was even more generous. He ordered people to give me 10 treasures for me to choose from. What did you choose? A living life. Caesar's disguise was flawless, but he was wailing in his heart, gods, please stop the human's long-winded and glib speech. I really want to stuff the head of the monster into this guy's throat. Damn it, I want to stuff one in my mouth too. I wonder if you have such a valuable treasure with you? Can you show it to me? Nina wanted to continue asking. This was a good opportunity to find out the truth of what Lucian said. However, before he could say anything, Tangerine had already walked to the side, pulled out a knight's long sword from a beautiful scabbard in the corner of the hall, and raised it with one hand. The name of the sword was Radiant. It was wider than a palm and taller than a man. The blade was made of elemental black steel, which was unique to the Free Trade Federation. Its color was as deep as the sea. There was nothing in the world more suitable for making weapons than elemental black steel. Nina had stood up with Tangerine before, but at this moment, he quietly took a step back. This fellow's eyesight was not bad. He could tell at a glance that this was a magic item that had been blessed by magic. Although it was not legendary, it was still quite high-grade and valuable. That's the sword. The noble named Tangerine did not seem to notice the hidden danger at all. He handed the hilt of the sword to Nina without any scruples. Oh, by the way, look at my memory. After Nina took over the seemingly heavy but extremely light sword and admired it, the noble clapped his hands again and said, "It's noon. Although this humble house has just been built, I have to be a good host. Although the dishes are as usual, I still hope you can come. Little guy, is lunch ready?" Chapter 138. Just as he finished speaking, the inner door was gently pushed open. A forest fairy with a gentle face and skin as white as snow, wearing a black muslin dress, came in quietly. She was barefoot, revealing the elegant lines of her calves and ankles. Her transparent wings, as thin as a cicada's, fluttered gently as she floated in the air. She bowed and said, "Everything is ready, master." At this moment, Nina could not shift his gaze away. Oh gods, that was truly a forest sprite, something that wizards yearned for even in their dreams. Every one of them could attract countless spellcasters to scramble for them. Yet this one used them to deal with all sorts of trivial matters. Caesar let Nina Brindle stand there in a daze. At the same time, he tilted his head slightly and looked at the deformed servant who was as silent as a stone statue. He smiled. "Sir," after a pause, he finally said to Nina, "The power of the Emperor of the unfallen empire is supreme. This is a gift from Emperor Enrique to me. In my opinion, there is nothing more wonderful than this in the world. It is my honor to serve you, master." Luna responded very cooperatively. Her voice was gentle and her posture was elegant. However, when Nina turned back to Caesar, she winked at him. "Well, since everything is ready, please follow me to have a meal. I believe you will not refuse." Nina opened his mouth and looked like he wanted to say something, but Caesar did not give him a chance to speak, nor did he want to give him time to think. Countless illusions were intertwined with each other and would definitely defeat his opponent completely. From a moment Nina stepped into the garden mansion, the Black Dragon's victory was already decided. As he spoke, he pushed open the secondary door, and the fake noble led the real noble into the dining hall. The long table was already filled with delicacies. Nina Brindle felt as if he had entered a magical place. He looked around, trying to calm himself down and regain his senses. The grandeur of the dining hall was no less than that of a prince's palace. The entire room was paved with marble and decorated with exquisite carvings. There were two exquisite statues standing at both ends of the entrance, with fruit baskets on their heads. The baskets were stacked with delicious fruits, forming a pyramid shape. For lunch, there was a whole roast lamb with blueberry jam, a large piece of honey roast duck with black pepper sauce, a huge fierce head fish, and a fruit salad. For drinks, there was wine and milk of poppy. The plates were made of silver, and the bowls were made of porcelain from a trading city. Of course, Nina was the Earl's eldest son after all. He wouldn't be surprised by these things. Although the ingredients were expensive and delicious, they were in line with the standard of living of ordinary nobles. It wasn't too outrageous. What was truly unbelievable was that on both sides of the table, there were many young girls with graceful figures kneeling. They had long hair that was like a waterfall and faces that were like elves. Their bodies were beautiful, and their eyes were clean. They were all wearing a hazy, transparent veil, and only a hazy, transparent veil. When they saw Caesar leading people in, they all looked over and smiled. In an instant, it was as if flowers had bloomed in spring. Nina clicked his tongue inwardly. This was too. He didn't reveal too much, but the contraction of his pupils and the slight trembling of his body betrayed this noble with good manners. Caesar turned a blind eye to this. He led him to his seat and started eating. Nina felt that this lunch was specially prepared for him. This was because although the host seemed to be eating all the time, he only tasted a few mouthfuls of the delicacies in front of him before stopping. In fact, this was indeed the case. Caesar didn't plan to eat it all. There was a lot of food on the table, but it wasn't enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. This fellow had to wait until there was no one around before he could really start eating. In the end, the girls served the desserts. They were actually the fruit baskets on the statues that Nina had seen just now. The desserts were taken down and placed in front of them. The two of them chatted casually and paused for a while. When the tiredness of the afternoon gradually overwhelmed them, the steward, who had been silent like a stone statue, presented something. It was a small porcelain cup plated with mithril. It was only 1/3 the size of a normal wine cup. There was a lid made of the same material on the cup. The steward's careful manner when he served the small cup made Nina curious. When the lid was opened and he saw the dark purple jam inside, he asked, "What is this?" "Caviar." Earl Tangerine smiled at him. "Oh, perhaps you haven't heard of this before. It's a great product that I brought from the elf forest. It came from a knight, elves who couldn't be traced. This time I brought it to the countries in the north. Please have a taste." As he spoke, he got up and walked closer. He scooped a spoonful of the so-called jam into his mouth. He narrowed his eyes and raised his head slightly. After tasting it for a while, he handed it to the noble in front of him. Caviar, Nina thought to himself. This thing wasn't a specialty of the elf forest. The countries in the north also had something like this. To be honest, he almost believed that the person in front of him was a real great noble. But now, this person seemed to have exposed himself. Without saying anything, he scooped up a spoonful and put it into his mouth. Since he dared to come and visit, he naturally wasn't afraid that the other party would harm him. As the eldest son of the Earl, Nina naturally had something to protect himself. The eldest son of the Earl chewed lightly and tasted the thing. To be honest, he didn't feel that the taste was very good at first. But soon, the noble experienced the taste of dizziness and fell into a dazed state. This was a feeling that could only occur when smoking high-quality tobacco. But at this moment, it appeared when he was tasting the delicious taste. It was so fierce and so fast that it seemed to take away all the troubles in his mind. What was imaginary became real, immersing him in all kinds of illusions and dreams. Caesar looked at him. Of course, this wasn't caviar. It was a kind of plant from the Underdark. It was discovered by the Black Dragon when he tasted hundreds of herbs. After that, the wild boar people experimented and extracted it and made it into something that was similar to an unspeakable thing in his previous life. The things in the Underdark were generally slightly poisonous, and this thing was even more so. However, it didn't have much effect on a true dragon. Because of his body, after Caesar ate it, other than the taste, it didn't have any other functions. But it was completely different for a human. The night elves call it reclaiming worries and giving happiness, Nina said to Nina. I believe that you now have a pair of eagle wings. With them, you can travel around Iradia to your heart's content. Yes, the eldest son of the Earl narrowed his eyes and indulged in it. That's very easy. Then please have fun. If your wings disappear, don't be afraid. Someone will catch you. Caesar clapped his hands. Two young girls wearing light veils immediately came forward and helped Nina into the room. The tipsy eldest son of the Earl was in a daze and could not help but become out of line and wanton. His hands were already beginning to wander in front of these charming and seductive young girls. Soon, the room was filled with panting sounds of different tones. At this time, Caesar brought the forest fairies out of the dining hall and walked out. It wasn't until they were far away that he revealed a malicious smile. Luna also couldn't hold it in any longer. She bent over and retched. If Nina Brindle saw those ugly, deformed creatures with heads that looked like insects and maggots, and found out that these young girls were actually shapeshifters in disguise, what would she do? Chapter 139. In the evening, when Nina Brindle left the garden mansion, he felt refreshed and at peace. Before he left, Count Tangerine was very generous and wanted to give him the two girls who had accompanied him before. He also kindly reminded him that they were mute girls and there was no need to worry. But he was the Count's eldest son after all, and Nina did not lose his head. Considering his own identity and to avoid any uncertainties, he still rejected the Count's kindness. To be honest, after he boarded the luxurious carriage and left the Count's mansion, he felt a little regretful. Northerners lived in the wilderness and under the scorching sun. Whether it was Rhine or the entire northern kingdoms, it was difficult to find such a delicate and graceful girl. Even if he was the eldest son of Count Brindle and the future Lord of Khaki, it was still difficult to find such a delicate and graceful girl. At this moment, he completely believed that the other party was a great noble from the trading city. Whether it was the longsword, brilliant light, the forest fairies, the sumptuous banquet, or the elven caviar, they were all things that a spy from the Rhine kingdom would not be able to take out. Especially the elven caviar that left a deep impression in his mind. He was afraid that only those extravagant southern nobles would be able to get their hands on such an unforgettable good thing. On the other hand, from the tone of the man's voice, the way he spoke, and the way he ignored the seductive girl, it was clear that he was in a superior position. Nina felt that her father, Count Brindle, whom she had always respected, was inferior to him in this aspect. If the Rhine kingdom could send out such a spy, then it could only be a supporter of Grand Duke Lionheart. Those counts with fiefdoms had personally come into battle. But thinking about it, even if the Rhine kingdom was defeated, these arrogant and cowardly nobles would not do such a thing. As for the evil dragon, Nina did not consider it at all and had long been completely eliminated. Now that he had basically confirmed the other party's identity, what Nina needed to consider was how to get money from the other party. The Brindle family's current problem could not be delayed, and the sudden appearance of Count Tangerine was his savior. Although he had a good impression of this generous and gentle noble, he had to solve the urgent problem at hand first. But how to solve it? Gather an army to rob them, tie them up as hostages, and then ask for a generous ransom from the trading city? Don't joke around. Even the stupidest and most radical noble wouldn't be able to do such a thing. This Tangerine had traveled all over the world and even dealt with outsiders, but nothing had happened for so many years. Moreover, he had met with head of state Temurtian and Emperor Enriel. He was definitely a big shot with a deep background. Even in the vast empire where the sun never sets, he would probably be able to eat well. Even if they had taken over the entire Rhine kingdom, his father would not allow him to do such a stupid thing, not to mention that the Brindle family was still at war with Grand Duke Lionheart. Even if they had annexed the entire Rhine to do so, his father would not allow him to do such a stupid thing to mages. Moreover, the other party was warm and generous to him, gentle and friendly. With Nina's character, he really didn't want to do anything bad to Tangerine. If it were his brother Roy, it would be possible. Since it was impossible to kidnap her by force, what should he do? Directly explain the situation and ask for Tangerine's help? But they had only met once and could not even be considered friends. Even if the other party was so rich that he could buy the entire Lion Kingdom, why would he fork out money for him and help the Brindle family? Nina encountered a new problem. On the other side, Caesar began to eat. Countless amounts of food were placed on the plates and were served by the shapeshifters one after another. There were whole sheep, cows, and large pieces of mammon lizard meat. Some of them didn't even have time to cook before they were sent in. Caesar didn't care about food. His stomach was as strong as a furnace, and he swallowed all the food without chewing. After a while, he finished his meal and wiped his mouth with a napkin. The human body was troublesome. Usually, he only needed to lick it with his tongue. Even his teeth were picked by little Luna. Caesar thought that he had to end this disguise as soon as possible. As a dragon, he was used to being comfortable and casual, but there were many things that humans needed to pay attention to. Now, Caesar was not used to it. What he could not stand the most was the glib tone of the Iradia people. He actually had to imitate their way of speaking and agree with them. Sooner or later, I'll burn you all to death, Black Dragon thought unhappily. At this moment, the servants came in from both sides of the door and cleaned up the food residue and bloodstains. The leader of the mutated monsters, who was disguised as a butler, was summoned to Caesar. Together with it were the two girls who had accompanied Nina previously. How about it? Which one of you is more confident? After cleaning himself up, Caesar held Luna in his arms like he was holding a baby. This made him feel much better. He asked the bugs. I mentioned before that she was one of the targets. The leader of the mutated monsters looked back at the two people kneeling behind it and said in a low voice, "We are all confident, Your Majesty." Imitation was the most innate ability of the mutated monsters. They had fly-like eyes, python-like tongues, and caterpillar-like fur. These countless sensory organs allowed them to collect every piece of information and detail about their target. If they really wanted to disguise themselves, they could even imitate the smell to be exactly the same. Is that so? Caesar said, "Let me see." Then, right before his eyes, the mutated monsters began to change their bodies. The shape-shifting spells worked together with their physical bodies. As their faces contorted and their skin moved, 3 Nina Brindles appeared in front of him. They were exactly the same as the eldest son of the Count that Caesar had seen before. Even the shape and structure of the mole at the corner of their eyes, the freckles on their faces, and the dense distribution of blackheads on the sides of their noses were exactly the same. As long as they did not speak, even Count Brindle and Roy would not be able to recognize them. Yes, they cannot speak. Even though the mutated monsters could imitate the appearance flawlessly, they could not match Nina's thoughts, memories, and habits of speech. That was an ability that only the brainworms had. Caesar did not have such a rare descendant, but it did not matter. As long as the appearance was the same, it was enough. Caesar did not need them to obtain Nina's memories and thoughts because he was not afraid of being exposed. If that happened, the entire Brindle family would be destroyed. He wanted to create a brand new Brindle and control Khaki. In reality, they were just a group of monsters in name. Since they were all mutated monsters, which Brindle should be the one to expose all of this? Now that the first step of the plan had been taken, the next step would become a matter of course. As long as he could find a way to find their location and let Nina bring him to Roy and Count Brindle, Caesar would be able to end everything. In close combat, the elderly green dragon was crushed to death in 2 rounds. If I didn't have a legend beside me, there really wouldn't be anything that could stop this black dragon. Not to mention, this dragon could even go berserk, automatic hormone effect. Chapter 140. Due to his family's demands and the psychological closeness, Nina had become quite close to Count Tangerine during this period of time. Finally, when he was invited to visit his residence, Lord Khaki's castle for the second time, the noble inadvertently revealed that he had a foothold in every country on the continent, and he hoped to have a similar place in the northern countries. He wanted to obtain a fiefdom. This was an opportunity. Nina seized on his words and went with the flow. He frankly told him that the Brindle family was in a long and drawn-out war with the tyrannical Duke Lionheart. Even though they were gradually winning, they were unable to chase the Lion army out of the Khakis' territory due to the lack of supplies. He took out a map and showed it to Tangerine. The Khakis' territory occupied half of the entire Lion Kingdom. Everyone knew that there was something fishy going on, but he insisted that the Brindle family was only defending one side. Nina said that if Count Tangerine was willing to provide assistance, the Brindle family would definitely not forget their friendship. If they won the war in the future, Count Tangerine could draw any territory on the map, and Count Tangerine would definitely agree to it. However, so you're not the Lord of Khaki, and your father has the authority to decide? Tangerine seemed to have focused on the wrong thing. His undisguised, frivolous words pierced Nina's heart deeply. The Count's eldest son was annoyed. He did not expect Brindle to say such words. It was difficult to believe that such words came from the mouth of a noble who was born in a noble family. But even though the words were crude, the truth was there, and he could not refute it. It must be those despicable and vulgar races. After interacting with them for a long time, even the most noble and elegant humans would become unbearably crude. Nina cursed in his heart, but at the same time, he smiled and said, "You're right. My father is strong and quick-witted, but I'm a beginner and ignorant. There are still many things that I need to learn, and naturally, I'm unable to take over the Kaki's affairs." There were thorns in his words. These words were actually meant to mock Tangerine for his ignorance of the etiquette of the nobles of the northern lands. His words were sharp. However, Nina regretted it as soon as the words left his mouth. In terms of status, he was inferior to the other party to begin with. Moreover, now that he had a favor to ask of the other party, how could he speak ill of him? "Be rational, Nina," he said to himself. "You are no longer a condescending aristocrat, but a sincere person asking for help." The Earl's eldest son was more knowledgeable than Roy. He knew that his words might offend the Earl, but he urgently needed the Earl's help. So Nina waited for the Earl's reprimand. If possible, he was willing to apologize loudly like a nun. For Brindle, Nina comforted himself. If he could get the help of this noble, even if the other party punished him by making him chew on black bread that was like sawdust or drink the soup of flies and maggots, he would gladly accept it and ask for another bowl. Fortunately, Count Tangerine didn't seem to notice the subtext in his words. He didn't answer him. Instead, he took 2 steps forward and looked at a mural hanging in the main hall of the Lord's castle. There were 3 men dressed in typical northern noble clothing. 2 of them were young, one on the left and the other on the right. They were hugging a middle-aged noble with gray hair who was full of vigor. He recognized the 2 young men as Nina and Roy. The middle-aged man in the mural was undoubtedly Count Brindle himself. This was the first time Caesar had seen the supporter behind Roy. They stared at each other across space and time. The other party was an iconic Northland noble full of power. He had thick eyebrows and a pitch-black beard. His white hair, which was cut into a military style, exuded a strong, heroic aura. He did not look like a noble, but more like a general. However, Brindle's face looked ordinary, but his thick eyebrows were filled with a hint of gloom that could not be dispelled. It was vividly copied by the artist, and it made Caesar feel a little uncomfortable. Seeing Nina walk up with a solemn expression, Caesar asked knowingly, "This is the real Lord Kaki?" "Yes, my lord." Nina smiled and introduced. "This is my father, Count Brindle. He guarded the borders for the Rhine family for his entire life and never left his fief. However, Duke Lionheart spread rumors for the sake of ambition and greed and started a war regardless of right or wrong. He wanted to take back the fief that the Brindle family had for thousands of years. In order to survive, we had no choice but to resist. I believe in your words, my lord." Caesar nodded solemnly. The mockery and sarcasm in his words was something that only the gods could understand. "Please believe that I sincerely want to lend a helping hand to a friend in danger, but I hope to visit Count Brindle and have a chat with him. You must know that it's not that I don't trust you, but only when I see Lord Brindle can I understand the situation and provide assistance to the Brindle family. Isn't that right?" Nina did not immediately agree to Tangerine's request. The suggestion seemed simple and reasonable, but it was not the case at all. The Brindle family was at war with Duke Lionheart, and as the commander of the Kaki family, Count Brindle and Roy had to be careful of countless plots and traps and guard against all possible assassinations and sneak attacks. Their whereabouts could not be easily exposed. Back then, the Green Dragon's assassination of the Northern Alliance's commander was a good example. Even now, no one knew that the Brindle family was the mastermind behind it. Naturally, they had a deeper impression of it than others and were extremely vigilant against it. In the current situation, Nina was the one who was pushed to the front. Everything that needed to be handled by the Brindle family would be handled by him, while Count Brindle and Roy were completely hidden behind the scenes. As you know, The front lines are currently at war. Count Brindle is leading the army to resist the Rhine family's attack. The battlefield is extremely dangerous, and I cannot let the Brindle family's friends be in danger. Nina bowed. For your safety, please forgive me for not being able to facilitate this meeting. Is that so? Count Tangerine sighed and ended the topic. I have to say, this is really a pity. He saw Nina's eagerness and vigilance. At this time, there was no need to push too hard. Going too far was as bad as not going far enough, and if he was too eager, he might give himself away. Caesar had made sufficient preparations in advance and understood the Brindle family's current situation. Now that Duke Lionheart had turned from offense to defense, if this dragged on, when the Northern Alliance's reinforcements arrived, the Brindle family would be destroyed without him doing anything. That was why they urgently needed external help to eliminate the Rhine family as soon as possible, swallow the entire duchy, and stabilize the situation before negotiating with the other countries. Unfortunately, the Green Dragon was already dead. The Green Dragon Kingdom had turned into Blackwing's nest, and this leg was completely gone. Without reinforcements, the Brindle family would not be able to continue the war. And at this time, Count Tangerine's sudden appearance would be the last straw. Although the overwhelming pressure would not make them lose their minds, it would make them willing to take the risk. Caesar only needed to start the conversation, and in a few days, Nina would probably take the initiative to come to his door and bring him to meet with Count Brindle. After preparing for so long, Caesar could still afford to wait. Chapter 141. You're saying that he wants to personally come to the battlefield and visit me? After sending Tangerine off, Nina immediately returned to the Lord's mansion. She arrived at the study and crushed a communication crystal. After it resonated, she began to talk to Count Brindle. Yes, father. Nina nodded. I can see that he doesn't trust me and wants to talk to you face to face. It seems that he intends to sign an alliance with Lord Khaki, the nobles of the trading city-states. It seems that those fellows have dealt too much with the merchants. They seem to think that only things written on paper have binding effect. Count Brindle laughed coldly, then turned to Roy beside him. What do you think? Unless we send people to the free trade city-states and the unfallen empire to verify that this person really exists and that his name and whereabouts are exactly the same, then we can trust him. Roy's face was expressionless. He said that he had met with head of state Timushan and Emperor in Rither. This is not a small matter and should be known by everyone. It won't be difficult to find some evidence. Nina had been in contact with them, so Roy and Count Brindle knew all the details of Count Tangerine's actions. But we have no friends in the south. Besides, even the teleportation spell of a great mage can't cross such a long distance. We would have to spend a lot of money to create a physical portal. Nina explained. We don't have the energy or time. Also, with that guy's actions, it's impossible for him to be a spy and assassin from the Lion Kingdom. My eyes can't be wrong. The Lion Kingdom can't hire such an orthodox noble. Although he and his brother were not close, they were not at odds with each other. They were still harmonious and discussed problems more objectively. I know it can't be the Lion Kingdom. What I'm worried about is the Black Dragon. Roy lowered his head and fiddled with his gloves. He said softly, There's been no news from the Green Capital for so long. The contract with the Mother of Poison has long disappeared. The old Green Dragon of more than 400 years old is now either imprisoned or dead. No matter what, the Black Dragon has really returned and won the battle against the Green Dragon. Roy said and turned to Count Brindle. Father, you said that smart people are always interested in benefits, and I agree with this point. But that Black Dragon, it's different. 7 years ago, I once allowed all my soldiers to fight to the death, causing the Mother of Poisons to come to the battlefield and personally take action. But in that battle, there was a scene that I remember very clearly. When the Black Dragon realized that its attacks were ineffective and that it couldn't even hurt me, it didn't abandon its kin and escape. Instead, it chose to stand with the orcs and gnolls. Roy furrowed his brows as he tried to recall the incident. What's even more puzzling is that it was standing in front of the orcs and gnolls. This means that if that old dog hadn't stood up in the end, once the green capital army charged, the black dragon would have been the first to be surrounded and in danger. After that, the more I thought about it, the more I felt that something was wrong. This kind of action is something that all the Pinochet dragons and even most of the human nobles wouldn't be able to do. This is enough to prove that it's one of a kind. Father, you said that under normal circumstances, a smart black dragon would never rashly attack and would choose to let us fight amongst ourselves. That's right, but I think that the black dragon doesn't belong to the category of normal circumstances. After dealing with the green capital, it's very likely that it would directly retaliate against us. What if this tangerine is the black dragon using a transformation spell to disguise himself and sneak into the northern kingdoms? If that's the case, then Count Tangerine's wealth is comparable to a country's, and the wealth of the green capital is enough to support his extravagance. Roy concluded, I don't trust him, and at this time, we have to be vigilant. But the dragons are all greedy. Nina was anxious. They can't, my foolish brother. Nothing is impossible in the Iradia. Roy looked into his brother's eyes and said word by word, You haven't seen it, so you don't know how terrifying it is. But I have. 7 years later, it defeated the Mother of Poison, proving that its power has grown to an unimaginable level. Roy did not hide his vigilance, and it could even be said that he was afraid. If it's really the black dragon in disguise, we'll die as soon as we see it. I don't want to gamble with my life. The ancient god that our father worshipped had given the Brindle family many mysterious abilities, but it had never responded to them, nor did it give them any real power. If it was really the black dragon, they would not be able to survive if their hiding place was found. After receiving Roy's strong objection, Nina had no choice but to look at her father and wait for the Count's decision. Well said. Brindle looked at Roy with a smile and praised. It seems that this war has made you grow a lot, and you'll be able to hold your own in the future. But he calmed down and knocked on the table lightly. But you have to consider the current needs of the Brindle family. We're embarrassingly short on funds and urgently need a large sum of money. Otherwise, we won't be able to outlast Duke Lionheart. Remember, don't give up on this rare opportunity just because of a possible guess. With that, Count Brindle nodded to his eldest son. Nina, tell Count Tangerine that I agree to meet him. Father. Roy's eyes widened in disbelief, and his voice could not help but raise by 2 octaves. Before this, he had already explained the cause and effect clearly, and he had also laid out the interests clearly. He did not expect his father to make such a decision in the end. Brindle did not turn around when he heard his second son's whisper and only waved his hand in his direction to stop Roy. He continued to speak to Nina, but tell him that in consideration of the need to maintain secrecy during the war, we will only allow him to come alone under your escort. Make this prerequisite clear, and then ask the Count of Tangerine if he agrees. Then tell me his choice. That was the end of Brindle's instructions. Nina was still a little confused, but Roy immediately understood and said, Let's do it this way. A true noble of high status would never agree to such a harsh and unreasonable request. Regardless of whether he had the protection of a magical item, he would never hand over his freedom to others. Moreover, under normal circumstances, nobles would feel that they were being looked down upon, and in order to maintain their dignity and status, they would reject such a request. But if the so-called Count Tangerine's real identity was the black dragon who had snuck into the northern kingdoms to seek revenge, he would probably agree immediately and give himself away. Whether it was real or fake, it would be clear after a try. Chapter 142. Caesar, of course, did not agree to it. He had made a lot of preparations before coming to the northern kingdoms. Of course, it was not only for revenge and to slaughter Brindle's family. He also had a long-term plan to take over the Khaki territory. So Caesar wanted the shapeshifters to observe the leaders of the Brindle family first. They would only attack after they were able to completely imitate them. Otherwise, the Black Dragon would not be able to guarantee that the enemy's corpse would be intact. He might even bring back a pile of charcoal. No matter how strong the shapeshifters were, they would not be able to imitate a pile of charcoal. Now that he had the absolute initiative, the Brindle family needed his help, Caesar had the right to make requests and conditions. He tried his best to avoid unnecessary things and try to solve the problem once and for all. What he did not know was that his direct refusal had unintentionally helped him avoid a big trap. 2 days after being rejected by Count Tangerine, Nina Brindle came again. He first expressed his apologies for his unreasonable request, and then said that he had persuaded his father that Count Tangerine came from a foreign country, and the guest's rights should be protected. In the end, Nina said that Count Tangerine was willing to trust his friend enough and agreed to let Tangerine bring his servants to meet him. It was a success. After everything was prepared, Caesar and the forest fairies boarded a luxurious carriage, while Nina chose to travel on a horse. He had changed into a set of bright armor and a long cloak that was decorated with a vast black field, giving him the aura of a lord. Behind them was a long line of shapeshifters and Brindle's guards. They were responsible for protecting their masters as they rode on their horses to the front lines. However, even if the horses didn't stop and their feet didn't touch the ground, the long journey still lasted for 3 days, and it could be said to be a long and drawn-out journey. If it wasn't for Luna accompanying him and chatting with him, Caesar would probably have been bored to death. At first, he thought that the Brindle family would arrange for some bandits to ambush them, but none of them appeared. The journey was unexpectedly peaceful, and they finally reached the Khaki Army's camp on the evening of the 3rd day. This is too slow. Caesar sighed in his heart. He estimated that if he were to fly, it would take less than 3 hours to complete the journey. Actually, the main reason was that the road was not easy to traverse. Don't think that the roads of the northern kingdoms would be developed to a great extent. The roads here were all paved by horses' hooves and carts. Occasionally, there would be farmers who were ordered to mow the grass. It was already good enough that the roads were bumpy. According to Nina, the commander's tent was actually not in the camp of the army, but in another secret location. Therefore, after passing by the Khaki Army's camp, the troops had to pass through the filthy black swamp along the embankment and enter the Hejin region on the other side. After winding for several miles, they finally arrived at their destination. Along the way, the curtain of night had already fallen. A large patch of electrified dark clouds surged over, adding a solemn and cold atmosphere to the early night. The horses stopped, and the soldiers were silent. The squires quickly stepped forward to open the side door and led the nobles out of the carriage. Accompanied by Nina, Caesar stepped into the main tent. Before he could say anything, the first person he saw was Count Brindle, who was leaning over the long table and looking at the map. Stein Brindle. The Count was only 54 years old, but he looked to be at least 60 years old. The short hair in the mural was no longer the same as before. His head was bald, and his yellowish forehead was filled with wrinkles. There were only a few strands of hair left behind his ears. The Count was dressed in the simplest of casual clothes. His outer coat was made of black leather, and his inner coat was made of black velvet. He wore a pair of black iron boots. In comparison, Roy, who was pacing at the side, looked more like a commander. Roy Brindle was nearing 30 years old. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his hair was meticulously combed. He wore a full suit of armor, and there was a decorative knight's sword hanging at his waist. There was a ribbon on his chest that had the Brindle family's emblem, the gray lion, on it. In addition to the 2 of them, there were 4 personal guards standing at the 4 corners of the wide tent. All of them wore light armor and held their long swords in their hands at all times. Brindle and Roy looked up and saw Caesar coming in. They did not move a step, as if their feet were nailed to the ground. They stared at Caesar as if Caesar was staring at them. Father. Nina, who was more gentle and friendly in comparison, was the first to break the short silence. He took 2 steps forward and said, "Please allow me to introduce Count Tangerine to you. He is my most respected friend. He has a warm heart and is willing to generously help the Brindle family when it is in danger. Welcome to Khaki, Your Excellency." As he spoke, Stein Brindle finally smiled and bowed to Caesar, saying, "It just so happens that Your Excellency is willing to lend a helping hand. We will never forget this friendship." As he spoke, He motioned for Caesar to take a seat and arranged for him to sit in an armchair. The Count himself sat in the seat facing the entrance of the tent. Nina and Roy sat down as well. When Caesar sat down on the armchair, he deliberately hid his face in the shadow of the tent's curtain. This way, he could hide some slight changes in his expression. His original plan was to enter the tent and let the shape-shifting servants behind him stare at the Brindle family for a while. Once they had completely memorized their faces, they would directly tear them apart. But at this time, Caesar sat down and calmly drank a cup of warm tea. He did not immediately act as planned. This was because he felt that something was amiss. Overall combat ability assessment. 45, 51, this was an ordinary number that belonged to the standard of an elite human soldier. It was only slightly stronger than the gnolls under Hogg's command. But what was unusual was that this number appeared on Roy's body. If it was the first time they met, it would make sense. But Caesar clearly remembered that Roy was an ordinary noble who neither received training nor knew how to cast spells. 7 years ago, the young noble's combat ability was only 10. How could the young noble from back then barely be able to compete with the knights now? Something was not right. If the Battle of the Wilderness 7 years ago made Roy realize that his ability was not enough, then with painstaking training and extraordinary talent, he advanced by leaps and bounds to the standard of an elite soldier. It could be barely explained. Brindle, an old count who was almost 60 years old, also had the same combat ability assessment. How could this be explained? Nina, who was beside Caesar, only had a 7 in her combat ability assessment. The difference was so huge that it could be said to be subversive. Could it be that the Count's eldest son was the only useless person in the Brindle family? No, there must be something wrong somewhere. Chapter 143. It's my honor to be able to visit a god's chosen who has always been favored by the goddess of luck after arriving in the northern kingdoms. Caesar thought for a while and decided not to act rashly. Instead, he sat down quietly and spoke in a human noble's tone. I wonder if the goddess of luck will give you another duke's scepter in the future, if I can gain the support of someone like you. Count Brindle smiled and nodded. I think so. Before this, Nina had always emphasized that Kaki was the one who was forced to defend. But now, even a fool could see that there was a problem, and there was no need for them to hide it anymore. At the end of the day, justice and evil were just names. Brindle believed that if Tangerine was really a knowledgeable noble who had traveled far and wide, he would not dwell on such vague concepts. Then, you just need to tell me what kind of help the Brindle family needs. Caesar's face was hidden in the shadows, but his tone was gentle and kind. Please don't be so courteous. I'm never stingy with my friends. What followed was a round of haggling. Even the highest-ranking members of the royal family were no different from peddlers pushing wheelbarrows as long as one ignored their purposeful expressions. But it was worth mentioning that the Caesar family purposely proposed many harsh and forceful terms and nitpicked many details, but they did not guard against them strictly. As long as Caesar raised an objection, they would give in. They were testing him. They were trying to find out the true intentions of the Count Tangerine. If he really came to negotiate for cooperation, he would definitely haggle over every detail and try to get the most benefits. But if Tangerine had other motives, he would probably agree to everything without hesitation. Now that he thought about it, Caesar finally understood why Nina made such a request. It turned out that the Brindle family's probing did not come from the level of strength, but from throwing out questions and letting him choose. If he was careless and did not correct his attitude, he would immediately fall into the trap and reveal his true identity. 7 years ago, when they first crossed swords, Caesar had already noticed that Roy was especially ruthless and had a deep background. The family behind him couldn't be too bad, and now it seemed that it was indeed so. However, since he had already noticed this, Caesar was naturally vigilant and did not step into such a trap. His performance was flawless as usual. After a long time, they finally finished discussing the details of the cooperation. Caesar did his best to keep up the act. He didn't show any impatience and kept smiling, fixed by the transformation necklace. When everything was ready, The old Count Stein took a pen and paper from the attendant beside him and read through the notes word by word. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he began to draft the contract. "This is our first time working together." The old Count signed Stein Brendel on the thick paper and then walked to Caesar's side and handed the contract to him. "It was a pleasure, and I hope that our friendship will continue." This distance was already enough for Caesar to reach out and crush it. But he still did not move because he already knew where the problem was. The other party was probably not a real person, so he nodded to the old Count and lowered his head to look at the contract. He noticed that in the beginning of the contract, the Brendel family prayed to the god of freedom. It seemed that they were believers of that god. But how could a lesser divine power, a god of the neutral camp, make Brendel sign so many contracts of allegiance? What's wrong with their army? He pondered in his heart, but his expression did not change. He smiled at the old Count, who was close at hand and watching his every move. Then he held a straight feather pen and signed the name Garin Tangerine. The black dragon was actually not afraid of revealing his name, because true dragons were not hollow spirits like devils. Once their real names were called out, they would appear and be clearly seen by people, which was a huge hidden danger. The true dragons themselves were existences with flesh, so they did not need to worry about this problem. The only thing to worry about was that the dragon's blood would be absorbed and used for the blood curse. However, in an occasion like signing a contract and swearing an oath, Caesar had to be cautious and vigilant. Iradia's divine power was too bright, and it could easily cause problems. So he directly used the name of the Black Dragon's younger brother. Of course, to avoid inadvertently tricking Garin, this was not even the stupid dragon's full name, and the word Nephidicius was missing. The name did not match, so the contract naturally could not take effect. Caesar had expected this. He raised his head and pretended to be surprised, looking at the Count and Roy, waiting for the Brendel's reaction. Nina looked at him with a puzzled expression, as if she thought the problem was with Tangerine. But on the other side, Brendel and Roy showed an expression as if it was only natural. "Please forgive us. The situation is a little complicated." Then Roy smiled and bowed. We are now in a time of war, and we have to be careful at every step and be careful of hidden arrows from all angles. As they spoke, the two of them quickly changed their appearances, removing their disguises and turning into two military knights. "My apologies, sir. This is?" Caesar pretended to be puzzled and asked, "You may not know, but our enemy is sinister and cunning, powerful and vicious." The knight showed him the magic ring with the ability to transform, bowed, and said, "In order to ensure absolute safety, we have no choice but to use this method to test your true identity. You are humiliating me." Tangerine stood up and slammed his knuckles on the long table 3 times with obvious anger. "This guy is getting into character. Please quell your anger, my lord. I'm sure you don't want your allies to be brainless and reckless." The knights knelt down on one knee and put their hands on their chests, saying, "We assure you that the terms of the previous agreement are all valid, and it was Count Brendel and Lord Roy who discussed it with you personally. We can use the link built by the mages to transmit information within a short distance." It was just like how Caesar spoke to Roy through the old wizard. "Now, please follow us. We will bring you to the real residence of the lords." Seeing that Tangerine's anger was gradually calming down, the knights praised him again and took the lead to lift the curtain and stood outside, gesturing for him to enter. And so, under the knight's guidance, he once again boarded the carriage and went to the real camp of Commander Khaki. Chapter 144. After a few twists and turns, passing through a cramped dirt road that ran through sand, mud, and weeds, the troops stopped again in the Black Cedar Forest. Count Brendel and Roy were already there waiting to receive them. Through the small window, he looked around and did not find any traces of a camp. There were few people here, the environment was harsh, and poisonous creatures were everywhere. It was hard to imagine that a lord would stay in this place. There were also very few guard around him, only a few dozen people, but they were all capable and seemed to be the trusted aides chosen from the loyal troops. Caesar got out of the carriage. "Welcome," Count Brindle looked the same as before. His eyebrows and clothes were the same, but in the assessment device, his ability value was only 5, much lower than the attendants around him. This time it should be a real person, right? Caesar thought. Without much formalities, the Brindle led him to a temporary straw hut and sat down. In a simple environment, they began to sign the contract and become allies. The content of the contract had been drafted long ago, and the Count had already written the name Stein Brindle, waiting for Tangerine to arrive and hand it directly to him. Caesar took it, glanced at it, put it on the short table, and wrote Garin Tangerine again. Then he put the feather pen aside and stared at the Brindle's reaction. The contract still did not take effect. The Count paused, a trace of surprise and annoyance flashed in his eyes, but then he concealed it well and said with a smile, "Lord Tangerine, Brindle has shown full sincerity. Now it's your turn." "No," he said, "now it's your turn." The bonfire was burning, and a few bolts of lightning flashed across the gloomy sky. Roy slowly got up, and, even he did not know why, he took 2 steps back. He stared at the forest sprite that had been silent and weak, and his brows furrowed. What's going on? Suspicion filled his chest, and Count Tangerine's inexplicable words made him feel uneasy. "We've confirmed it." Roy tried to comfort himself. "Don't be so paranoid. Listen to what this noble is going to say next." "What are you talking about?" "I've already signed my name to the God of Freedom. Now it's your turn. Please sign your real name, Your Excellency." The Count was slightly annoyed, but he still explained. "My true name is Caesar Orderonzo Tangerine. Perhaps you have never heard of this name, but this voice, Roy..." Count Tangerine had always maintained a gentle smile, but in this paragraph his voice was gradually changing. From the elegant tone of an ordinary southern noble, he quickly turned into a deep, hoarse voice. "I think you should remember." The crackling of the bonfire echoed in the camp, as if the stones were responding to it. Roy gripped the hilt of the sword at his waist, his whole body shivering. "Black Dragon!" Bang! Brindle also noticed the problem and quickly flipped over the short table in the straw hut. His trusted knights immediately reacted and swarmed over. "Send us away," the Count shouted. At the same time, the spellcasters who had been standing silently behind him raised their staffs. None of the guards were slow to react. However, the dustless land. The illusory ripples not only dispelled the spellcaster's spells, but also destroyed all the magic items. Under the incredulous gazes of the people, a giant claw reached out from the smoke, and the huge black dragon stood with its head held high, occupying their entire vision. The first to die were the spellcasters. The great wizards, whose magic power was sealed, were as fragile as thin paper in front of the black dragon. They were smashed into a pile of mush by the sharp claws. Their flesh and blood were mixed together with the black robe, no longer distinguishable. Brindle wanted to escape, but he suddenly stopped after taking a step forward. His defensive items had lost their effectiveness, and endless flames surged and poured down on him. His screams were drowned out by the surging flames. In the next second, the Count's clothes and skin began to evaporate, and Stein Brindle fell down, instantly turning into charcoal. At the back, the deformed servants bared their fangs and claws and fought with the knights. Some of them wanted to escape and call for reinforcements, but they were immediately hit hard and swallowed by the flames. Whoosh! 1, 2, 3. A total of 3 poisonous arrows were shot towards the black dragon's mouth, eyes, and ears. However, none of them were effective. They were either engulfed by the flames in the air, blocked by the hard-eye membrane, or sunk into the ears without causing any damage. At this time, only Roy could barely maintain his calm. He did not escape, knowing that no one could be faster than the black dragon. The Count's second son gripped the bronze sword hilt tightly, glanced at his brother who was too scared to move, and decided to take the risk. Instead of retreating, he charged towards the forest sprite who had been staying beside the black dragon. The scorching heat burned Roy's back like a raging inferno. He began to run, knowing that if there was anything that could help him find a way to survive, it could only be the forest sprite. "I have to use it to threaten the black dragon." That was Roy's only thought. The knight beside him used his long sword to strike the deformed monster in front of him. But before he could find another opponent, the flames swept through his body, and he rolled on the ground, wailing in pain. Fire, fire everywhere. It was like a fiery hell. As he ran, the distance between them was quickly shortened. But just when he thought he was about to reach the forest sprite, the destructive flames swept past him, leaving a wide scorch mark on the ground. His hope was extinguished like a candle in the wind. I surrender. Chapter 145. In order to reduce the noise and avoid trouble, Caesar tried to fly as high as possible, shuttling through the sea of clouds. Although the low oxygen and low pressure brought by the high altitude made him a little uncomfortable, it did not have any substantial effect on him. At this time, Caesar turned his head, ready to look at the condition of the little guy and the thorns on his back, but he found that the clouds in his vision suddenly froze, the air around his ears suddenly stopped, and everything was slowing down. Soon, his vision blurred, and he was pulled into the black dream that he had not explored for a while. At first, he still saw endless darkness, but as his vision shifted, Caesar immediately noticed a reddish light, which was eye-catching in the dark space, coming from the front of the display cabinet. Caesar began to move in that direction, and when the black dragon came closer and saw the trophy that suddenly appeared, his pupils shrank slightly. At the front of the display cabinet, there was a trophy that was close to 20 meters tall, taller than when he stood on his hind legs. Moreover, the trophy this time was not black jade. It was a reddish light gold, but in fact, the color was not uniform. The bottom of the trophy was dark, as black as ink, like the midnight sea, but the top of the trophy was colorful, as if a whirlpool was flowing with vitality. Its shape was the same as before, but the surface was not smooth at all. Caesar bent his hooked toe and gently brushed it, feeling that the texture was like unpolished gravel, rough and rough. It was meaningless to argue about the material. After looking at it for a while, Caesar immediately bent down to observe the words that appeared on the base of the trophy. That was the most important thing. Avenger. Hatred was like a tumor in the heart, a poison in the throat that could not be removed, could not be forgotten, and could only be cleansed and healed by blood. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth. Reward. Exoskeleton growth enhancement armor. Attachment. Gene enhancement type 3. Neurosensory connection. Standard type power core. For the first time, there was an additional column in the introduction of the trophy, showing attachment. However, the introduction of the Black Dream's rewards had always been short and could not be concise, so Caesar could only think and guess by himself. Fortunately, Caesar was already used to it. The overall color was different, but there was no doubt that this was a pure gold trophy, which was of a higher grade than black jade. Speaking of which, because of the many twists and turns during this period, the speed at which he obtained trophies was quite fast. It had to be known that in the same 7 years, Caesar and his brothers had guarded the hidden lake together for 7 years, and this guy had not even touched the tip of a trophy. However, in the second 7 years, the rewards he had obtained had already jumped from the bronze rank to the 3rd stage, touching the gold rank reward that he had never considered before. Looks like I still have to stir up more trouble, Black Dragon thought to himself. However, this kind of thinking was actually a little idealistic. Considering the uniqueness of the achievement rewards, it would only be more difficult for him to obtain trophies. The fact that no trophy had appeared for killing a strong enemy, the Green Dragon, was the best proof of this. After waiting for a while, Caesar realized that it could not find any other useful information at the base of the trophy. Caesar stretched out its right claw and touched the trophy. At this time, the originally shining and tall pure gold trophy's material became as soft as liquid and was easily pierced through by the Black Dragon's sharp claws. After feeling the touch, it immediately surged and melted in an instant, turning into a ball of thick pure gold liquid. It quickly surged through Caesar's right front claw, gradually covering his entire body, and seeped into the pores between the gaps of his scales. Immediately after, the black dragon's body underwent a huge change. On his scales, a layer of shining steel like obsidian spread out, first wrapping around Caesar's torso, then spreading to his head amidst clanging sounds. The stratum corneum that had been deliberately formed in the past all degenerated at this moment, shrinking back into the body and disappearing completely, replaced by a harder and heavier armor. At the same time, the black dragon's wings, which were originally so huge that they were somewhat deformed, now began to shrink. With the cooperation of Caesar's autonomous allocation unit, the dragon's wings shrank to a normal state that suited him. Then, the wings were completely wrapped in a layer of pitch-black armor. Its bones became thicker and had a hard texture, while the edges became sharper. At the same time, many fine holes appeared, and the insides were spiral-shaped, so small that it was difficult for ordinary people to see them. Other than that, there were deeper changes. Inside the black dragon's body, a second heart appeared, condensing and forming in the chest cavity. On the surface, it looked exactly the same as a dragon's heart, but upon closer inspection, it was not an organ made of flesh and blood, but a completely dark red energy body. It was connected to a few tubes around it. The structure was simple, and the effect was clear. Its tubes were connected to the heart's blood vessels, transporting the energy flow to the new blood, turning the blood into a carrier and transportation tool for energy, circulating in the black dragon's body. Of course, Caesar was aware of all this, but he could not help but frown slightly. The armor only strengthened his strength and defense slightly, but Caesar's ability in this area was already very outstanding, and the armor itself was a super weapon. If the bio-enhancement armor only had these functions, it would not be of much use to him. However, Black Dream did not give a more detailed explanation. Even if the bio-enhancement armor had other functions, it would probably be up to him to figure it out, explore, and discover. The modification was completed. Caesar shook his head, recovering from the changes in his body, and lowered his head to stare at his claws. Although he did not know how much weight he had gained, he knew that his body had now become unimaginably heavy. Although the exoskeleton bio-enhancement armor had strengthened his strength and defense, in a sense, it was also a burden on the body and required the support of a strong physique. No wonder there was Dragon Body Gene Enhancer Type 3 in the attachment. Seeing that he had received the reward, Caesar wanted to leave the dark space. The spotless land was a lesson learned, and it taught him that a lot of things could only be effective in the real world. He wanted to try and figure it out in Iradia. With this thought in mind, before Caesar could empty his mind, he saw a blur in front of his eyes, and his mind instantly left the black dream and returned to reality. However, he seemed to have forgotten one thing. He was high up in the sky. The black dragon's wings, which had already shrunk, and its weight, which had suddenly doubled, made it impossible for it to flap its wings to fly. Amidst the whistling of the air, the dragon instantly plummeted and began to fall vertically. The sudden change in direction and the sudden drop in altitude made little Luna, who was behind him, scream, but it was difficult to hear clearly, and was drowned out by the roaring hurricane as soon as it appeared. However, Caesar was still Caesar, and because of the connection between the nerves and the body, he quickly familiarized himself with the usage of the bio-enhancement armor. Although the sudden change in his consciousness from illusion to reality made him pause for a moment, Caesar quickly reacted and began to deal with the matter in front of him. The black dragon adjusted his body during the rapid descent, and in the next moment, a surge of dark red flames burst out between his wings, and a powerful thrust suddenly appeared, causing the guy's speed to increase by several times, and he once again soared into the sky. Chapter 146. In just 30 seconds, Caesar had completely fallen in love with this feeling. This was a brand new speed that he had never experienced before. Although it was not at the speed of sound, it was not far from it. At the very least, it would be easy to travel 1,000 miles in a day. After leaving the territory of the Northern Alliance, passing through the Theron Gobi, and crossing the monster Grand Canyon, this guy was completely overjoyed. He He began to lower his altitude and gradually increased his speed to the limit. In fact, after reaching this speed, a large part of the kinetic energy produced by the armor was used to overcome the wind resistance. After all, the Black Dragon's current shape was not aerodynamic at all. If the body shape could be modified to the streamlined shape of a fighter jet in his previous life, the Black Dragon's speed might be even faster. However, Caesar did not care about this now. He looked down at the rolling mountains below and felt the strong airflow hitting his skin. For the first time since coming to Iradia, the emotion of happiness appeared in his mind. Yes, the first time. Caesar let out an unpleasant laugh from his throat, which then turned into a dragon's roar. The huge black dragon swept across the sky with a red tail, cutting through the clouds and leaving an eye-catching trail. Then he heard a soft cry of surprise. When he turned around, the little one had been thrown far away. Thinking about it, in this state of extreme speed, the surface of Caesar's body was no less than being baptized by the storm. With Luna's strength, how could she hold on to him tightly? Then, Caesar quickly turned back and chased after the little one who was in free fall. Soon, he was side by side with Luna. Then, he opened his mouth and held her in his mouth. The black dragon continued to roar in the sky, causing thunderous airflow to rumble past. Half an hour later. Ha! Ha ha! Caesar was having a good time, but at this moment, the crimson flames that were constantly emitting from his wings suddenly flashed twice intermittently, emitting a few strange sounds of air flowing. Then, they were extinguished and there was no more sound. Black Dragon grinned, and his smug smile instantly froze. Only then did he realize that the Bio-Boost Armor's neurosensory link had long sent out signals of energy exhaustion to Caesar's mind, but he didn't take it to heart. In the end, the current situation was simply out of gas. The Black Dragon controlled its wings to flap a few times, and its kinetic energy was exhausted. It began to descend rapidly, falling head first into the ground once more. Looking at the approaching land, Caesar gave up on thinking. He didn't choose to die. In fact, even if he didn't have the bio-boosting armor, with this guy's strong physique, he estimated that he could withstand this degree of acceleration. Although he would be seriously injured in the end, it shouldn't be enough to kill him. Judging from the speed of this guy's recovery, as long as he was alive, everything would be fine. And now, this guy was actually deliberately exhausting the energy. First, he wanted to test how long the turbine propulsion could last under extreme conditions. Second, he wanted to find a way to replenish the energy. After all, this was not a single-use item that would be scrapped after a single use. Forced landing. The land was constantly magnified in the roaring hurricane. In Caesar's eyes, it was first the undulating terrain, then the vast mountains and plains. Then, he could clearly see the trees and rivers. In the end, every tree, every piece of gravel, and every bush was reflected in his eyes. Rumble. Amidst the howling winds and fierce collisions, the Black Dragon landed. This guy first crashed into a small slope, which directly collapsed the protrusion. He staggered in the air, rolled once, and then fell again. Like a meteor falling from the sky, countless trees and shrubs were crushed. The earth, wood, and stones along the way exploded, and he was even bounced up several times by the huge impact. In the end, he left a deep gully on the ground and still slid for a long distance before finally stopping. Fortunately, this guy landed on his stomach and didn't fall flat on his back. He could still maintain the dignity of a true dragon and not be unscrupulously mocked after being discovered. The Black Dragon blinked, lying on the ground, wagging his tail. He wasn't in a hurry to get up. Instead, he opened his mouth wide and prepared to let the little guy Luna out. "We're here." Luna covered her head, feeling dizzy. Even though she was protected in the Black Dragon's mouth, she was still dizzy when that guy was forced to land and roll. With great difficulty, she flapped her wings and barely managed to fly up. "We're here." Caesar still didn't get up, lying there and talking to her. "And we've already passed." Huh. Before, when they were in the high-speed airflow, Luna couldn't even open her eyes. Only after a while did she realize, "How did you become like this?" True dragon's self-transformation, you know. He had mentioned this to her before. After saying this, Caesar slowly stood up and shook off the dust and dirt on his body. The reason why he didn't move was because he was checking the delicate state of his organs after such a degree of impact, feeling the enhancement and strengthening brought to him by the bio-boost armor. Caesar was very satisfied with the results. Before obtaining the pure gold trophy, if he had fallen from such a height, he wouldn't have been on the verge of death, but he would have at least been seriously injured. Broken organs, broken tendons, and broken bones were all to be expected. But now, Caesar had only suffered some minor injuries, nothing serious. The bio-boost armor was still shining, flickering with a metallic and obsidian luster. Very good, Caesar thought. This degree had already exceeded his expectations. It would be an act to say that he wasn't happy. Of course, there was one point that this guy had overlooked. Although the bio-boost armor had played a major role in resisting the high-altitude impact, it also had the effect of the gene enhancement type 3 drug. It made Caesar's organs stronger, so much so that they hadn't been shattered by such an impact. After the inspection, just as he was about to bring Luna back to Blackwing's nest, Caesar's body suddenly surged with a strong sense of hunger. Speaking of which, in this young black dragon's 17 years of life, it wasn't that he hadn't been hungry before. But this time, the hunger was more intense than ever. His stomach seemed to be twitching, and there was a distorted feeling that it was about to digest itself. Caca. He couldn't care less. Filling his stomach was more important. Because he had sworn not to eat dirt again, Caesar grabbed a fallen tree from the side and swallowed it whole. When necessary, the stomach of a dragon could digest everything it ate, including dirt and wood. Although the nutrition was worrying, it could at least maintain their lives and satisfy their hunger. But this time was an exception. 2 trees were swallowed, but Caesar's stomach wasn't satisfied at all. This thing had no effect on him at all. The next second, the black dragon began to gnaw at the dirt, burying his head in the gully he had created before, swallowing all the black dirt that was covered in gravel and pebbles. Although eating dirt made Caesar feel a little better, the hunger was still there. This guy's consciousness was very good, so he quickly understood that his strength was still strong and his spirit was still full. So the feeling in his stomach wasn't hunger, but a signal transmitted by the bio-boost armor due to the lack of energy. It was a feeling similar to hunger. Thinking of this, he controlled his body and turned off the feedback from the bio-boost armor. The hunger disappeared as expected. Chapter 147. The Black Dragon, whose body had grown even larger, spread its legs and sat in the gully that it had created. It did not care about the little fellow who was circling around it and observing it curiously. Its claws lightly scratched its iron chin as it pondered about the matter of replenishing the biomass gear's energy. Just now, he had eaten a little more soil, and the feedback of energy deficiency had weakened a little. Although it was actually a drop in the bucket, the overall feeling was still very strong. But this phenomenon proved that eating soil was effective. But if he wanted to rely on eating soil to replenish his energy, he was afraid that he would have to die here and gnaw on the ground for a whole day. This efficiency was too low. There must be other more advanced alternatives, Caesar thought. Next, he went to hunt a fiery maned bear. This kind of bear was very common in the northern wilderness. After roasting it, the meat was delicious. Although it was not as good as the Bismarck bull, it was still one of Caesar's regular meat dishes. Using the slender tail claws to handle the food, Caesar finished it quickly. He cut a piece of meat from the roasted bear leg and gave it to Luna. Then he swallowed the whole bear in 2 bites. Speaking of which, the little guy was originally a real vegetarian who only ate flour dew for food. But now, she was also influenced by the black dragon to eat meat. Little Luna hid in the corner, squinting her eyes like a squirrel and chewing slowly. After eating a whole fiery maned bear, Caesar activated the feedback from the biomass gear. The strong feeling of hunger surged again, and it was not relieved. It seems that red meat is not working. He thought. Meat was not working, but soil was. What was in the soil? Humus? Microbes? Minerals? Minerals? Caesar figured it out. After trying to use plants and animals, this was the only thing he could think of. However, minerals were actually a very general concept. If he wanted to confirm it, he would have to try it step by step. This was the energy source of the biomass gear, and it was the most important thing at the moment. Caesar, of course, had to study it thoroughly first. Of course, if he had to do this alone, it would probably take a lot of time, and he would be exhausted to death. Fortunately, he had a large number of followers in the territory that were on standby at any time. Let's go home. After finding the direction of the experiment, the black dragon shouted to the forest fairy and returned. How dare they talk about stopping the war, just like that? How arrogant. Seeing the messenger leave, Balasai Lane held his sword with one hand and knocked heavily on the table with the other. Then, he took a sip of the white porcelain teacup and finally said, "As long as we defend to the death, no matter how strong and fearless their soldiers are, they won't be able to take even half a step forward." And in a short period of time, the Brindle family will not be able to digest the territories, and sooner or later, they will be dragged down. Grand Duke Lionheart pondered for a moment, analyzing the pros and cons of the battle. Now that the battle had reached this point, the two sides had already shed all pretense of cordiality. If one didn't die, then it would be very difficult to negotiate a truce. As the Grand Duke and King Lion, Baelish Lion was over 50 years old, but he was as strong as a young man in his 20s. If Caesar were here, he would find that this guy was not only a great noble, but also a powerful knight. Even if he was sitting, the Grand Duke still looked tall and strong. His legs were long, his shoulders were broad, and his stomach was flat. Although his arms were thin, his muscles were firm, and he did not have the usual fat and greasy appearance of a noble. The current Duke Lionheart was a decisive person, so he shaved off the beard around his lips and chin and did not leave any facial hair on his cheeks. Only a head of lush golden hair could be seen. I received news a few days ago that the Brindle family has found an ally, a great noble from a trading city in the central region, and that person may provide assistance to the Brindle family. The vassal nobles who stood beside him thought for a moment and said, "Moreover, they offered to give back half of their land in exchange for a truce." From the looks of the messenger, the Brindle family would be willing to give them more concessions. This condition was tempting enough. Your people are simply bullshit. Grand Duke Lionheart's posture was like an angry lion. Do you think they will still propose a truce after receiving assistance? A self-contradictory paradox. No matter what, their concession of returning the land is real. Another noble said, "Your Grace, our rear is becoming more and more chaotic. All of our troops have been transferred to the front lines, and we no longer have the strength to suppress the rebellious serfs. To be honest, we can't delay this war for much longer than the Brindle family. Moreover, the enemy's soldiers are too fierce and cruel, and our troops are very weak. Your Grace, we think that the best choice now is to temporarily stop the war, take back the land, and then persuade the other countries. Wait for your allies to send troops, and then eliminate the rebels in one fell swoop." His vassals suggested one after another. Coincidentally, these words were exactly the same as what Caesar had said to the mutated monsters 2 days ago. Black Dragon had also proposed the concept of befriend those who are far away and attack those who are near. He had told the mutated monsters that after the situation had stabilized, they had to act steadily according to this theory. In Caesar's eyes, the khaki territory was a very important part of his forces. The Black Dragon could directly influence the humans through this territory, so he was quite concerned about this place. Lionheart's expression was uncertain. His eyes swept over each of the vassal nobles, and after thinking for a long time, he finally spat out a word, "Fine." The year 1634 of the Iradia's third era. This year was as peaceful as ever, but for the Northerners, it was indeed a year worth remembering. In 1633, the Lion Kingdom Civil War was on the verge of breaking out. The Brindle family rose to power, and at the beginning of 1634, the situation completely escalated to white hot. The flames of war burned every corner of the kingdom, and even spread to the neighboring countries' territories. However, Just when the people thought that the Brindle family's momentum was like a rainbow and that they would fight until the Lion Kingdom's capital was under siege, the Brindle family suddenly admitted defeat. Not only did they request for peace talks with Lionheart, but they also gave up half of the territory that they had painstakingly conquered in exchange for a moment of respite. This puzzled the rulers of the various countries. But no matter what, the return of peace was a good thing for the people. The Brindle family's initiative to give in was seen as being inspired by the good God, and it improved their reputation among the commoners. There was nothing new under the sun, and the topic of the Northern Alliance ended there. Let's take a look at the external news brought by the adventurers. In the distant Green capital, where the Northern Alliance's expedition failed, a war also broke out. It was said that the situation was even worse than the Lion Kingdom's civil war, and it was extremely tragic. The main army under the Mother of Poison, the Ogre clan, was completely wiped out, and their traces were wiped out in the wilderness. This war was called the War of the Two Dragons by the Northerners, and it was recorded in some historical records about dragons. The final winner of the war was a black dragon. This news came from a famous prophet in the Northern Alliance, and according to the erroneous descriptions spread by the adventurers, the dragon had 4 wings, a back full of eyes, and could use 5 types of breath: ice, fire, lightning, acid, and poison. However, until now, there had not been any information about the dragon's portrait that had been leaked. However, it was easy to imagine that the dragon's power must be stronger than the old green dragon to be able to defeat the Mother of Poisons. Perhaps it was an extremely old black dragon or even an ancient dragon. The people were always guessing and talking about the giant dragon that represented wealth and power. During the discussion, they gave it a name that was even more exaggerated than the Mother of Poison, the Dragon King, and the dragon language and elven language translated it as Emperor. Of course, if the other party was a kind and neutral metal dragon or gem dragon, it would never be able to get such an ostentatious name. But for the greedy and cruel Penishade dragons, the people were not stingy with giving them the most exaggerated and shocking names. They could not wait for the stupid Penishade dragons to kill each other and fight to the death for a name. Chapter 148. The current situation in Blackwing's lair was much more stable than Caesar had imagined. The only problem was that after the Mother of Poisons fell into eternal slumber, the enslaved subterranean dwellers fled one after another, causing the production here to come to a complete standstill. The new Blackwing's lair faced a long period of food shortage. Fortunately, Hogg was not completely helpless about this. Under the premise of allowing the various clans to spread out and hunt in the surrounding areas, the Jackallan leader also contacted the wild boar people in the Underdark to slaughter the animals that were originally raised in the underground world. They pulled a long supply line and transported them to the newly developed territory to stock up on supplies. When Caesar returned, the Jackallans and the wild boar people had just completed the transfer of a new batch of supplies. The black dragon's movements were very loud. His footsteps had long been heard, echoing in the dark forest. The Jackallans thought that they were under attack and held their weapons, ready for battle. As the distance closed, the forest could no longer hide the huge black dragon. The spikes on his back and wings emerged from the canopy, like the protruding dorsal fin of a shark. Then, Caesar squeezed through the layers of obstacles, completely occupying their entire field of vision amidst the hoarse cries of the trees and shrubs. Your Majesty. Hogg held the legendary weapon in his hand, Bloodthirst. Looking at the black dragon's scarlet eyes, his originally tense body gradually relaxed. After a pause, he knelt on one knee. Your family has been waiting for your return. The addition of the bio-boost armor had caused considerable changes to Caesar's body, but it was not to the point of being unrecognizable. At least, it was much easier to recognize the changes than the last time in the Underdark. The Jackallan leader was already experienced, so it only took a little time to confirm the identity of the black dragon who had suddenly appeared. You're transferring supplies from the Underdark? Caesar glanced at the wild boar people who stood silently and solemnly, then looked at the supplies piled up on the cart. He quickly understood what was going on and asked, Yes, your majesty, Hogg said. Those cavemen fled in all directions, unwilling to serve Blackwing's nest. We taught them a lesson with clan blood, but it was still ineffective. I understand. Caesar nodded. It was not that he did not allow Hogg to transfer resources from the Underdark. The Black Dragon had always treated the Underdark as his own logistics base, and that was its purpose. However, Therengobi was a long way from here, and they had to go around a pass like Mostel. It was easy to be attacked and cut off. Once Blackwing's nest became dependent on him, this problem would become a huge hindrance to Caesar if a war broke out. This was not a long-term plan. He had to farm. Not to mention export trade, at the very least, they had to be self-sufficient. However, Caesar was still at a loss on how to implement it. After all, his experience and understanding of territory construction and operation was limited to some games and movies. When it came to actual operation, there were many details that he could not grasp. Since I can't figure it out, I'd better solve my current problem first, he thought. Caesar yawned and no longer cared about Hogg and the wild boar man. He went straight back to the Emerald Palace and brought the little fellow to the treasury left behind by the previous ruler of the Green Capital. Whether it was gold, silver, gems, or high-grade magical metals, they could all be categorized as minerals. If he wanted to find a way to force the armor to replenish its energy, Caesar would definitely come to this place to take a look first. The dragon's gold and silver were piled up like mountains as usual, and the magical items were still the same as when he left, neatly displayed in crystal containers. Ever since Caesar opened the treasury and brought a batch of wealth to the northern countries, no one had entered this place. Even if the Black Dragon did not deliberately issue an order, his dependents regarded the entire palace as a forbidden area and did not dare to set foot in it. Looking at the various magical items, Caesar subconsciously thought of the transformation necklace from before. Unfortunately, it had been destroyed. As the closest magical item to the Black Dragon, the transformation necklace had completely disintegrated and collapsed the moment it appeared in the dustless land. It was then digested by the dragon's furnace-like stomach and had long disappeared without a trace. To be honest, Caesar felt a little regretful. This item was very useful to him, at least in the case of sneaking into the northern countries, but now it had disappeared just like that. The dustless land was like a flood and ferocious beast that did not distinguish between friend and foe and showed no mercy. Fortunately, although the transformation necklace was also a magical item, it was not rare in Iradia. It could be seen from the fact that the Brindle family could take out 2 transformation rings to test it. The craftsmanship of this treasure was not difficult. If there was a need, Caesar could still get it from the humans if he spent some time and effort. However, the root of the problem was not the transformation necklace. It was now very clear that all magical items in his hands would have their effectiveness reduced and their abilities plummeted. They could also become disposable items and be sacrificed heroically in battle. Under these circumstances, if the Black Dragon still insisted on using magical items, he would probably go bankrupt sooner or later. Putting aside the idle chatter for now, Caesar looked around. First, he stared at the gold that the true dragons regarded as their lives. He stuck out his curled and forked tongue, hooked a piece of gold from the wall-like pile, and chewed. In the end, the taste was unexpectedly good. The gold nugget tasted like white chocolate in his previous life. It was hard in the mouth, but it quickly became soft and sweet. It was very charming, silky, and refreshing, and the Black Dragon couldn't stop. He wondered if other dragons would have the same taste as Caesar when they swallowed the gold nugget. After chewing for a while, Caesar swallowed the gold nugget. His expression then turned serious as he carefully sensed the feedback from the forced armor through the nerve and body connection. For the first time, the feeling of starvation and lack of energy was greatly reduced. After the gold nugget entered Caesar's stomach, it was broken down and absorbed at a speed that the Black Dragon could not understand. The particles flowed into the second crimson heart in his chest and were transformed into energy that flowed through his body, through his blood. It was effective. Caesar smacked his lips. This result was actually within his expectations. The black dragon slowly lay on the ground and sensed the feedback from his body. He carefully recorded how much energy a pure, solid gold nugget the length of a human palm could give him. After a rough estimate, he tried silver, copper, iron, and even more metals one by one. He found that they were all equally effective, but there was a clear difference in the conversion efficiency. The conversion efficiency of minerals like copper, iron, and even diamond was very low, less than half that of gold. Magical metals like adamantine and mithril, on the other hand, were a level higher than ordinary metals. After a small piece was converted, it could output a lot of energy in the Crimson Heart. It was a very good supplement. Chapter 149. The Black Dragon swallowed 3 gold bars, 2 large handfuls of silver ornaments, and a small pinch of adamantine and mithril. Only then was he truly full. His biomass gear had received an unprecedented replenishment and was ready to go, transmitting a powerful feedback. What a headache! Caesar came to a realization. He would probably have to eat gold for a living in the future, and the higher the conversion efficiency of the metals, the more valuable they would be to Iradia. In that case, if Blackwing's was unable to generate any income in the future, he might not even be able to feed himself. It was fortunate that it was him. If it were any other true dragon, upon discovering that the biomass enhancement armor could be replenished in such a manner, they would probably burst into tears. In the end, they would either have to give up on this ability or choose death. Regardless, Caesar was still in a rather good mood after finding a source of conversion replenishment. Thus, the black dragon hummed an unpleasant tune as he glanced at the old green dragon preserved in the compartment. He was still not at ease, so he applied another layer of ice breath before leaving with his tail wagging. He exited the treasury and closed the door. Although this magical door mixed with mithril was now completely reduced to an ornament, as long as the black dragon was still around, no creature would dare to step into this place. But he had to be careful of those adventurers. Yes, be careful of those thieves, bandits, and robbers. No one knew what this fellow was thinking, but his expression suddenly became ferocious. He bared his teeth, puffed up his cheeks, and nodded repeatedly. Now, these treasures were no longer just treasures. They were also his spiritual sustenance, his source of energy, and Caesar's lifeblood. Anyone who dared to covet them would be skinned and hanged. The forest sprite looked at the black dragon's inexplicable change in expression, confused. Fortunately, she knew that Caesar would occasionally behave in such a strange manner. She could tell that the black dragon was in a rather good mood. Then let's play a game of cards, Luna thought excitedly. She ran into her small house, took out the iron box that she regarded as a treasure, and begged Caesar to play 2 rounds with her. Caesar agreed. Thus, in the Emerald Palace, the 2 of them sat on the ground without hesitation. In fact, Luna was floating while Caesar was lying down, and the forest fairy faced the black dragon lord. Now that he was faced with the problem of how to make money, Caesar subconsciously thought when he was playing cards, was it possible to make the entire set of cards and sell it to the outside world to make money? There was an answer. In Eladia, the target group of this card was not only teenagers or even humans. It was also targeted at long-lived species that lived long lives but often lived dull and boring lives, such as dragons, elves, fairies, and so on. In Iradia, where time was abundant but entertainment activities were extremely scarce, such a card would probably explode in popularity the moment it appeared. Those who had a certain status and did not lack wealth would probably be addicted to it and have a lot of fun playing it. See Luna for details. As long as he put in a lot of money and effort in the early stages, embedding a mass energy crystal in the card, and then using magic to record images and sound effects. Oh gods above, to be honest, even Caesar did not know what kind of effect it would have or how much money it would make if he did this. Not only would this solve his problem of eating, it might even bring him a huge trophy of wealth. And if he marked the back of the card with a mark of Blackwing's nest, he might even get a reputation reward. Damn you, you really are a genius. This black dragon became more and more excited the more he thought about it. Looking at Luna, who was concentrating on how to play the card, He could not help but stick out his tongue and lick the little one. "Are you a?" "Aya," Luna cried out in surprise. She could not even hold the card firmly with her magic. After stabilizing her weak magic with great difficulty, she said angrily, "You must have done it on purpose. I have already calculated how to play the card. You will definitely lose this round. But I can't remember now." She frowned her little eyebrows and put on a bitter face. She began to study again. She did not care much about the black dragon's licking. Previously, whenever they were in danger, Caesar would often suck her into his mouth. Luna was already used to it. Of course, the vision was beautiful, but to really realize it, Caesar still had to face many practical problems. The cost was easy to solve. The black dragon, who had obtained green capital and khaki, could be considered a moderately rich man. It was not to the extent that he could not even create a few sets of cards with mass energy crystals. Moreover, Caesar had knowledge beyond the times. If he really started to produce, he could even create a batch of assembly line workshops. There was no need to worry about the manufacturing cost, efficiency, and so on. The key to the problem was the copyright. It must be known that card games were not difficult products. They were not like those precious magic items, where each item needed to be carefully crafted, extremely difficult to forge, and could not be replicated. But for the cards in Luna's hands, after knowing the specific gameplay and rules of the game, Iradia had countless creatures with the ability to produce them. As long as someone came with 2 thick sheets of paper and a few artists, they would be able to produce a decent imitation. And those powerful lords would be able to produce high-end products that were even better than Caesar's. Iradia was not developed, but the creatures here were not stupid. The idea was good, but after it was produced, how to protect the product was something that Caesar had to think of ways to solve. Otherwise, before he could earn any money, the competing products would have already spread across the entire continent. Furthermore, if he did not take it for granted and consider the details, Caesar still had to solve the first step of the problem of sales. Under normal circumstances, the other intelligent races would not even want to touch a set of strange cards with the name of Blackwing's nest on it, and the label came from a 5-colored evil dragon. They would subconsciously treat it as an evil dragon's bewitchment and sweep it into the trash. How to reverse the deviation in perception was also a big problem. Iradia did not have a precedent that Caesar could use as a reference. With so many troubles popping up one after another, he suddenly felt that his brain was not enough. "Your Majesty." Just as Caesar was daydreaming and playing cards with Luna, he suddenly heard a respectful whisper from outside the palace. He shifted his body and turned his head. He found that the wyvern leader, Erha, had appeared outside the palace without him knowing. Behind him was a group of trembling shapeshifters. "Your Majesty, they trespassed on the edge of the palace without permission. I wanted to kill them, but these guys said that they were following orders and had completed your orders." Erha looked up at him. After receiving Black Dragon's permission, he pushed his wings and hind legs a few steps to the right to let the shapeshifters in. "Your Majesty, after you left, we immediately started collecting things in Khaki Hill and brought the things you wanted." The shapeshifters dragged a few large boxes and knelt in front of Black Dragon. Their leader did not come this time, so he was probably very worried. The things that humans did were enough for him to slowly understand and absorb. When the boxes were opened, there were not expensive treasures or magical items, but some ordinary books. Luna floated over curiously to take a look. "The God we believe in elemental power. From beginner to Mistura, brief history of the continent, the forging of magical items adventurer's guide, survival wisdom of Bismate monster illustrated handbook Schiller's, selected poems, immortal sun, never sets lord's self-cultivation." The little fellow was confused at first, then surprised, and finally suspicious. After the shapeshifters bowed and left, she asked, "No way. Caesar, what are you going to do with these human books? Are you a collector?" "No," Black Dragon said righteously. "I love learning. Learning makes me happy." He had been longing for these things for too long. Because of his lack of common sense, he had suffered many losses in Iradia. He could not bear the life of an illiterate person anymore. Moreover, Establishing a complete knowledge and cognition system would help him think about the problems that he could not solve at present. Maybe he could come up with some solutions. This was one of the reasons why Caesar tried so hard to control Khaki. Without the power of the upper nobles on the human side, he really did not know how to get such a large number of precious books. Even if Black Dragon was willing to pay, it would be very difficult to get in touch with humans through the shapeshifters and trade with magical items. Ordinary merchants could not get such a complete set of books. Chapter 150. Ineffective. This was the 11th time that Caesar had followed the instructions of elemental power, from beginner to master, and tried to perform the most basic beginner level of cantrips. Unfortunately, the scene was still in an awkward silence. Damn it, even Luna could easily perform such a useless level 0 cantrip. Even the forest sprite, with a combat power of only 2, could easily perform it. Caesar was completely discouraged. Either the book was fake, or the dragon was a fake dragon. Either way, one of the two was fake and did not exist. In fact, the situation had already proven this point, but Caesar did not give up. The cause of the matter was the formation of the crimson heart in his chest. This guy accidentally discovered that he could manipulate the flow of energy like a spellcaster manipulating magic power. This reignited Caesar's hope. He tried to use the flow of energy as magic power and tried to perform a spell. The result was terrible. The black dragon could not raise his head. The crimson energy and elemental magic power were not the same substance. It was like the difference between water and honey wine. No matter how much water one drank, it would not make one drunk. It would only make one full. So angry. However, although the crimson energy and elemental magic power were different in nature, they could be categorized under the general concept of abnormal abilities. Caesar pondered. Although it was impossible to make the crimson energy and elemental magic power have the same effect through spellcasting, it did not mean that it was a death sentence and had no effect. For this reason, Caesar purposely flipped through all the books related to abnormal powers, including but not limited to elemental power, the origin of magic, the wizard's journey, the 4 ways to cast fireball, and so on. He began a 2-week-long, in-depth study. The result made him feel even worse. After exploring, Black Dragon discovered that mana, magic, came from the elemental tide, and the elemental tide could be categorized as an idealistic force. Its principles were unknown, but its effects were obvious. In Iradia's theoretical works, everyone guessed that it was highly likely to come from a spirit. To Caesar, studying the mind was no less than a form of torture. It reminded him of the time when he asked Blakesia and Garen about the principles of spells when he was young. Blakesia and Garen kept talking about instinct and thought control. Forget it. Caesar thought bitterly. In fact, this research was not completely fruitless. He discovered that although the crimson energy in his body could not be transformed into an external form like mana, it could still produce effects within his body. Under precise control, and when the body could bear the load, it could instantly increase the power output of a group of muscles in the body, resulting in a power outburst that far exceeded the limit of the past. In an instant, his strength would increase by almost 50%. With Caesar's foundation, such an increase was extremely terrifying. He might even be able to kill a dragon with one punch. If Iradia did not have fancy magic, but instead had the combat aura that was multiplied to the peak, Caesar might have thought that the energy flow produced by the Crimson Heart was the same as that thing. Unfortunately, it was not. On the other hand, the information sent by the shape-shifting monster organization was extremely complete. Caesar spent a long time before he finally finished half of the books. At this time, he could not help but be grateful for his dragon body. The energy and memory of a true dragon was far beyond what humans could reach. Their energy was as endless as nuclear energy, and the almost photographic memory strengthened Caesar's ability to obtain feedback, giving him more motivation to continue reading the long books that were originally difficult to finish. If Luna did not look for him, This guy would probably stay in his nest until he finished reading all these books. What? You want to leave? No way. After hearing the little one's words, the black dragon's eyes widened, and 2 puffs of white smoke came out of his nose. You forgot that you belong to me now. You have to wait until I have the ability to sense before you leave. With the contract as proof, the gods will not allow you to break the contract. I've been fooled. You were lying to me at that time. Luna ran behind Caesar and wagged his tail. And I'll just leave for a little while. Just a little while, and I'll be back soon. After a laborious explanation, the unhappy black dragon finally understood. It turned out that the little one was homesick. The forest fairies were not cold-blooded Pinochet dragons. Although they would mostly live alone or with their partners after they reached adulthood, the fairies would still stay in the same family with their parents before they reached adulthood. Luna was obviously still underage, according to the forest fairies' calculation, and it had been a full 8 years since she left home and went to the outside world. Even if the forest fairies were long-lived species like the true dragons, it was still a long time. The little one was born in a normal fairy family. At this time, her parents were probably starting to get anxious and worried about her whereabouts. And now that Caesar had gotten his revenge and the black dragon's lair was stabilizing and there were no pressing matters, little Luna had the idea to try and see if the big black dragon would agree to let her go home. I see. Caesar scratched the armor on his stomach, then lowered his head and carefully observed the expression on the little one's face. You really want to go? Oh, I'm just going back to take a look. I won't run away. Luna begged pitifully, then raised 2 fingers. Just 2. Seeing that Caesar's expression was not good, she quickly put away another finger and changed her words. Just 1 month. Her home was in the elven forest to the east of the wilderness. It was not far from here, and was actually quite close. It could be considered a neighbor to the current black dragon's lair. Otherwise, she would not have bumped into the black dragon the moment she left home. Wait a moment. The black dragon thought for a moment and said in a low, muffled voice. He then left the unimaginably large study and went to another compartment in the Emerald Palace. He opened the door to the treasury and started rummaging through the pile of magical items. After about 30 seconds, he took out a necklace and handed it to Luna, saying, "Take it. I'll give it to you." The Ice Vein necklace could be activated automatically when a user was injured, creating a frost armor that lasted for 1 minute. Its effect was close to that of a great mage's defensive spell. To be honest, this item was not considered a high-end item in the Green Dragon's collection, but it had the advantage of having a sizable characteristic. Even Luna's small body could use it easily, changing automatically and being convenient to carry around. It was not that Caesar did not allow Luna to go home. This was a sentiment shared by most kind and neutral intelligent creatures, so it was understandable. It was just that the forest fairy's individual abilities were too weak, and Luna was prone to daydreaming and making stupid mistakes. He was worried that she would run into danger or bad people on her way home. He did not consider that there were not many bad people in Iradia who were more evil than the Black Dragon. Chapter 151. The weather was clear. After passing through the crisscrossing mountains and barren plains, Caesar set foot on this land. The climate in the east was even more pleasant than green. The warm wind carried with it the scent of flowers and earth, as well as the rich smell of grass. He couldn't go any further. In front of him was the vast elven forest. The environment here was more primitive than Caesar had imagined, and it was full of shocking power. The towering green-crowned trees stretched endlessly to the other side of the sky. They were intertwined with each other, rippling with the smell of magic, forming the first pass of the elven forest. Many kind and neutral species lived here. This place didn't welcome evil species like the Black Dragon. Even the environment was like this. "We're here." Luna came down from Caesar's neck. She wrinkled her little nose and smelled the familiar smell, revealing a smile. After arriving at the elven forest, Caesar could basically relax. The elven forest was a gathering place for good races. It was very difficult for some creatures with evil hearts to survive in there. Once they were discovered, they would be hunted down and killed. Unprovoked wars caused by opposing factions were the main theme of Eladia. I'll come back to find you in a little while. Just a little while, which is the time it takes for you to sleep. Luna stared at the green-crowned forest for a while before running back to hug the black dragon's leg. Unfortunately, the difference in size was too great. She couldn't even hug Caesar's forelimbs completely. However, the little fellow still hugged him with peace of mind. She pressed her face against his scales and said, "You have to be good. Don't run off to fight again. Rest for a while first." She knew that it was almost impossible to completely persuade a chromatic dragon. As a true dragon, the chromatic dragon's blood was full of natural instability and tyrannical desire to conquer. This was the foundation set by the chromatic dragon queen. Nature could not be changed. Luna knew that she couldn't persuade Caesar, nor did she plan to. She only asked him to rest for a while first. She didn't want to wait until she came back and didn't even know where the dragon had gone. "I know." Caesar nodded. He then grabbed a cloth bag with a communication crystal and handed it to her. "Take this. If you need anything, call me. Crush it and send a message." "Yes." The little fellow took it and used her transcendence energy to drag it, nodding gently. In fact, Luna was in a good mood. Her joy of returning home was beyond words, but when she saw Caesar talking to her so seriously, she became a little sad for some reason. "Ha! Weak, intelligent creatures." Caesar harumphed and urged her. Then he watched as the little fellow flapped her wings and dragged a large bag of communication crystals into the wild green field. Her figure disappeared. "Follow him." He spoke to the air, and as soon as his voice fell, the transparent vision turned slightly yellow, revealing the figures of a group of battle lizard men. At the same time, the wyverns flapped their wings and descended from the sky. The soil around their feet was turned up, and the ankheggs respectfully prostrated themselves. "Protect her until you see her family." Caesar did not look at them. Instead, he stared at the green field in front of him and muttered, "Also, you have other missions. Go and find out more about the races living in the elven forest. If Blackwing's nest wants to expand, it cannot avoid this area." "But, Your Majesty," the wyvern muttered softly, "this is the elven forest, a forbidden area for the evil races. Even the Mother of Poison did not touch this place back then and started a war with the races inside. Most of the creatures in the elven forest lived in idyllic seclusion. They did not care about the outside world, so they were not much of a threat. However, it was extremely difficult to gnaw on them. Therefore, even the arrogant Lord of Green Capital did not show his claws and fangs in this place. However, Caesar was different. As far as he knew, the elven forest had a lot of magical minerals. They were all the food he needed. Moreover, once he captured this place and enslaved a group of kind races, it would be a great help to his future card plan. The elven forest. Is there a defensive barrier outside? Caesar turned around and looked at it. "No, Your Majesty." This wyvern was not as smart as the husky. It did not think about the meaning of Black Dragon's words and answered systematically. "Then what are you waiting for?" The Black Dragon Lord's voice became rough. The subordinates did not dare to speak. They all activated their abilities and quickly merged into the green forest, following little Luna. When the figures of the monsters were about to disappear from sight, Caesar whispered, "Nero, my king." The leader of the demon dogs slowly revealed his head from behind the hill. Hearing the black dragon call him, he jumped lightly and nimbly arrived beside Caesar. "Did you hear what I said before?" Caesar asked. When the demon dog nodded, he continued, "Follow them. If they can't do it, tear them apart." Actually, Caesar could ask Luna about the situation in the elven forest, but he did not want to. After bidding farewell to the forest fairies, Caesar returned to Blackwing's nest. He began to arrange the matters of replenishing the tribe in the territory. He called Hog and Gaul over. If they wanted to develop well, they had to take root here. If the land was not good, they could reclaim it. The area that was burned was just right. If the environment was not good, they could rebuild it. But without a tribe, everything was just empty talk. Take your wolf pups and run outside. Go and catch some gnomes. Have a husky cooperate with you. Catch as many as you can. I want them all, Caesar said. He had done some research in the past few days. Although gnomes were a dirty, inferior species and chaotic, they had outstanding advantages. They generally had a talent for making inventions. As long as they were managed well, independently, they could become a good research team. Moreover, some of the gnomes that grew askew, and there were quite a few of them, even knew how to forge weapons. Caesar was unable to recruit the powerful dwarves at the moment, so he needed gnomes to play a role. After Hogg accepted his orders and left, the black dragon turned to Gaul, his tone slightly gentler. Can you contact the Torrens? Blackwing's nest now relied solely on the wild boar people's breeding industry in the Underdark. Sooner or later, it would become a bottleneck for development. They needed to find other means of supply. Farming was the most important. A long time ago, Caesar had set his sights on the Torrens. However, at that time, they were in a period of war. His dependents could not be in two places at the same time, so he had put it on hold. Now, he had finally put it on the agenda. Different methods had to be used to deal with different tribes. The Torrens were not like the gnomes. They were descendants of the ancient Orc Empire and had inherited the orcs, never be a slave. Therefore, it was impossible to kidnap a Tauren tribe by force alone. Fortunately, they had a close relationship with the orcs. Caesar could rely on the orcs to persuade the Torrens to work for him. I can't contact them, Gaul replied with certainty. The Stone Crow clan was originally a small tribe in the wilderness. Other than the illogical Archmage save, everything else was in line with the normal ecology of a small tribe. Naturally, it was impossible for them to have connections other than their own. The only contact they had was the Flying Ape clan, which was driven by the Black Dragon's summergrass trade. But we can look for them, your majesty, the orc leader added dryly. For some reason, Caesar thought that after killing the Green Dragon, destroying Brendel, and completing his revenge, the Stone Crow clan's depressed mood would be somewhat relieved and they would become more optimistic. In the end, not only did they not feel that way, they became even more rigid and silent. In Hogg's report, the orcs almost never interacted with other tribes except for the occasional contact with the gnolls and wild boars. They would do whatever the Black Dragon told them to do. The two sentences Gaul said in front of Caesar today were probably equivalent to all the words this orc leader said in an entire day. Chapter 152. After arranging the matter of accepting new species, the Black Dragon waited for the gnolls and orcs to leave before lying flat on the ground again. He wagged his tail in boredom and stared blankly at the empty Emerald Palace. The little girl had left, so Caesar was not worried about her safety. Although the Battle Lizardmen Diggers and the Demon Hound leader had not returned, she had already contacted the Black Dragon and said that she had successfully returned to the secret tree hole in the Elven Forest Fairy's house to meet her parents. The first day of Luna's absence, Caesar stared at the empty treetop fortress and was stunned for a long time before he came back to his senses. After thinking about it, he was ready to go outside. To be honest, this guy was really lazy. He was not a responsible lord at all. After returning, he had not even patrolled his own territory. At least he should go out and show his face, Caesar realized. Later, he also planned to go to the Underdark. After all, he had not gone back since he arrived on the surface. Everything was handled by Hogg and Engalmo. Even if there was no important news, it was still his own logistics base. He should go back and take a look. The Black Dragon stood up and crawled out of the palace. After such a long time, his family had already digested the remnants of the Green Capital and established a new territorial structure with the characteristics of Blackwing's nest. The perimeter of the treetop fortress was a high-pressure isolation zone. It was only the residence of the Battle Lizardmen and the Wyverns. As the descendants of the dragons, they naturally became the guards of the Black Dragon Lord. Caesar also intended to let these guys be independent and close to his deterrence range. They would not mix with other clans. It was clear that these fellows had spent quite a bit of effort on their new residence. It was rare for the lizard men to be so diligent. They dug through the river and drew a tributary from the river beside Blackwing's nest. They built a small pool that made them feel happy. They lived and bred in that place, living a semi-aquatic life. Wyverns, on the other hand, were tree dwellers. Around the treetop fortress, one could see that there were wyvern nests built on the larger, luxuriant, ancient trees. Those nests were created by the wyverns using their saliva to glue together branches and stones. They were about 2 meters in size and spanned 2 to 3 branches of the large tree. In front of the treetop fortress was a dirt road opened by the orcs and gnolls. After choosing a place, they cut down all the surrounding trees and shrubs and made fences and piled them up on both sides. Fortunately, the road was wide and eye-catching enough to allow 2 adult horsegate lizards to walk side by side. Otherwise, in the dark forest, it would be difficult for Caesar's family to find this path. There is only one path leading to the treetop fortress. Normally, if one wanted to meet the Black Dragon Lord, they would have to pass through this path. In other places, the twin-legged flying dragons and battle lizard men maintained the strictest surveillance. Any beasts or monsters that came out of the forest would be treated as intruders and would be attacked and killed. The reason why the shape-shifting monsters had almost been killed was because of this. Arriving at the periphery of the isolation zone, the control was much looser. This was the habitat and activity area of most of the Black Dragon's family. The various clans maintained a scattered state, scattered all over the dark forest. Some clans did not get along with each other and hated each other, so their habitats were far apart, such as the gnolls and the shadow manticores. Some clans rarely got along and would gradually start to integrate, such as the orcs and some wild boar people that were stationed on the surface world. If one continued to walk out, they would reach the edge of Blackwing's nest. There were some foreign clans curled up here. Some of them were monsters that surrendered to the Black Dragon after the defeat of the Green Capital, such as the Thorn Beasts. There were also some clans that were afraid of the Black Dragon's power and wanted to join him, such as the Dwarf Bear people and some scattered kobolds. Caesar maintained a low altitude and revealed his face. He slowly streaked across the sky above the territory, overlooking the entire Blackwing's nest. His low voice was like a rolling thunder. Everywhere he passed, monsters would look sideways, stop what they were doing, and then lower their heads and crawl. Caesar was quite satisfied with the current situation of Blackwing's nest. Although it was not very orderly, there was at least a certain degree of order. After all, monsters had their limitations. It was almost impossible for them to be as orderly as humans and maintain a precise social structure. Even so, Blackwing's nest was much more orderly than other non-human evil forces. Of course, this stability was only on the surface. One could imagine that once something happened to the Black Dragon Lord, or if he disappeared for too long, this place would erupt into chaos. However, at least for now, Blackwing's nest was still in a rather harmonious state. After confirming that there were no problems, the Black Dragon began to increase his speed and climb higher. Deep red flames spewed out from the gaps at the ends of his wings like a raging fire. Caesar shot up into the sky with a bang. He then adjusted his direction and found the direction of Theron Gobi and sped off. 15 minutes later, boom, he landed with a loud crash without slowing down. Using his unparalleled strength, he forcibly twisted the huge inertia and nailed himself to the ground. Rocks crumbled under the giant Black Dragon's feet, splashing everywhere. Smoke and dust rose into the air, accompanied by a powerful shockwave. As the attached dragon body strengthening potion type 3 began to take effect, this dragon's power received new nourishment. It was accumulating power and was ready to welcome a new round of breakthrough growth. This caused the Black Dragon to start to feel sleepy and was about to enter another long slumber. Sooner or later, I'll have to connect Blackwing's nest and the Underdark. Caesar thought as he stared at the dilapidated and desolate abandoned city. The distance between the two bases was too far. It was always a problem, but this was not a small project. Although Caesar had only flown for 15 minutes, Blackwing's nest was still quite a distance away from the Underdark. He had to pass through the wilderness and a monster canyon on the way. The wilderness was easy to conquer. After Caesar's family's destruction, it had once again fallen into a state of chaos and disorder. But the monster canyon had its own master. The flying ape tribe had occupied that place for nearly 1,000 years, longer than the black dragon Ezatoria and the green dragon Sylvia had occupied the green rainforest. They had a strong foundation, but it didn't matter. No matter how strong a tribe's foundation was, it was still a tribe after all. It couldn't compare to the wildly expanding Blackwing's nest. Moreover, Caesar had the orcs' layer of relationship. Peaceful unification was also a good way. In this way, the golden name of the orcs was quite useful. When his power expanded in the future, Caesar could even slowly gather the remnants of the ancient orc empire and create a new monster empire. This vision was doable. Caesar learned from some books that the subordinates of the orcs had always been loyal and united, and they didn't have a good life. Most of them were continuously persecuted and hunted by humans and hid in various remote corners of Iradia. Under such circumstances, the possibility of the orc clans meeting and joining forces with each other was very high. It was just that he didn't know if there was anyone else who had done so before him. Caesar learned about the history of the ancient orc empire. In the distant Second Era, the various conflicts between the ancient orc empire and the empire on which the sun never sets continued to intensify, and finally a war broke out. Up until now, it was still the largest war in the history of Aledia. The flames of war had spread across the entire continent. Countless branches of the two empires had participated in the war, either actively or passively. Legends had fallen, and kings had been bathed in blood. Through the groundless history, the war between the two empires had even led to a war between the gods. The gods that the humans and the orcs believed in had fought within their respective divine kingdoms. This long war, with both sides winning and losing, lasted for 76 years, during which there were two huge turning points. The first was Isaac, the leader of the Broken Bones tribe. This guy carried out a crazy plan to steal the divine power of the Eye of Gawushi, and succeeded in causing the divine object to completely seal its power and no longer work. This was the starting point, which made the Orc Empire gradually fall into a disadvantageous position in the war, and there was a continuous defeat for 8 years. In the end, the Orc Emperor knew that this would lead to a slow death of the empire, so he decided to gamble with all his strength. In the super battle of more than 1 million people in the Sunset Plain, the descendants of the Giants, who were the main battle tribe in the Orc Empire, changed sides for some reason. They suddenly withdrew their defense line and led the Dawn Legion to raid the main hinterland of the empire, ending the war and beating the ancient empire that could compete with the rising Sun City into the dust. The history of the Second Era of Iradia also came to an end with the destruction of the Orc Empire, and it entered the Third Era, where humans had all the right to speak. It had been more than 1,600 years since then. What was puzzling was that after the victory was established, the empire on which the sun never sets cruelly cleaned up the remnants of the Orc Empire. At the same time, they also used a sharp sword against the giants who had made great contributions. Not only did they not fulfill the oath they had promised before, but they would rather be punished by God to carry out a genocide against the giants. Moreover, their strength was even more ferocious than hunting down the remnants of the Orc Empire. So today, the giants of Iradia were almost extinct. Even the books did not have the figures of these guys. Caesar did not find any information about this race. Chapter 153. The abandoned city in the Gobi Desert was hidden in the yellow sand, like a lonely castle that no one cared about. There had been no living things here, but it did not mean that there were no dead things. After a few years, there were more skeletons in the ruins. From time to time, one could see shadows in the shadows, and some were even holding weapons. Knowing how to use weapons was a signal among the skeletons. This meant that they were of a higher level than the unintelligent skeletons. Although these guys were still incompetent in the undead sequence, they were much stronger than the ordinary skeletons. Of course, they were not the native creatures of Theron's ruins, but the spies sent by Angulmo to the surface world. They were responsible for monitoring the surroundings of the ruins and keeping the people below on guard to deal with some unexpected situations. Most of the skeletons did not know Caesar. They were not afraid of the dragon's aura, nor were they afraid of huge individuals. After sensing the roar and dust, they immediately gathered around, silently raising their swords, hammers, and axes and rushed toward the black dragon. Unfortunately, the way these guys opened their mouths was not scary at all. Instead, it was kind of cute. Of course, this was only for Caesar. These emotionless undead that only knew how to kill, it was difficult for ordinary people to fight back. For them, it was like a horrible nightmare, and for some inexperienced adventurers, it would take a lot of time to get rid of these skeletons. The black dragon began to walk forward, either swinging them away with his tail or grabbing them one by one with his claws and then throwing them aside. Anyway, he did not crush the skeletons directly. He did not inherit the ruthlessness of the Pinochet dragons that would immediately go berserk once they were offended. For these good soldiers who did their duty all year round, the Black Dragon Lord was quite tolerant. So, under the relentless obstruction of the skeleton soldiers, Caesar steadily opened the steel gate and began to walk down. Behind the Black Dragon, the skeletons were still persevering in their pursuit. It was only when they sensed that Angulmo was waiting silently at the exit of the passage that the soldiers, who had persevered, finally stopped and ran back to the world above ground. Speaking of which, there was also a small episode. Caesar found fresh human corpses in this place through the tunnel of the magic nodes, and he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. The corpses were dressed differently. Some wore leather armor and held long swords, while others only wore ragged clothes and held short daggers. They looked like mercenaries and bandits. They probably found a closed steel door by chance and thought that there was some secret treasure hidden below. They couldn't hold back their greed and curiosity and went to explore. In the end, they were slaughtered by the high-level undead sent by the skeletal dragon. He was truly an adventurer who would take advantage of every opportunity. Welcome back, my father. In front of him was a huge skeleton that was emitting phosphorescent flames. It was about 14 to 15 meters long from head to tail, and its bones were grayish-brown. Inside its chest and ribs, there were surging blue balls of light. The phosphorescent flames outlined the transparent shape of a true dragon, just like when it still had flesh. The soul fire burning in its eye sockets was so vigorous that it overflowed from its eye sockets and floated above its head. Yug Angolan Targaryen, the Dragon of Bones. Comprehensive Combat Ability Assessment. 290, she had completed the stage of explosive growth after birth and reached the state that a high-level undead should have. Although her ability had not been completely fixed, the following progress and growth would become quite slow. The daughter remembered the smell of her father, so no matter how Caesar's body shape changed, Angulmo could immediately distinguish it. The skeletal dragon bowed and seemed to want to get closer. She tried to move forward, but in fear of the majesty of the Black Dragon Lord, she immediately gave up and stopped in place. Caesar didn't notice the emotions and small movements of the undead. This guy was paying attention to other things, and then he couldn't help but frown. He saw that behind Angolan, a large number of skeleton soldiers were entangled and fighting, and further away, there were also many undead figures that were fighting. "What's going on?" he asked. "War." The skeletal dragon turned away from the body that blocked Caesar's line of sight and came to his left. "The war with the Black Knight. Nigendro, this seemingly honest guy, actually betrayed us." Caesar scratched his chin twice with his nails. In this case, the Black Knight might as well not stay. The humans in Iradia all said that the chaotic camp was not good. In fact, he could accept it whether it was chaotic or not, but it was not good to be capricious. "No, father." Compared to the Black Dragon Lord, Angulmo's body was extremely petite. The skeletal dragon's body was 15 or 16 meters long, but the difference in physique could not be made up. Low-level undead creatures can grow in fighting and absorb nutrients. We are preparing for the future and training better and stronger skeleton warriors. Angramo explained, her voice gradually turning from calm to excited growl. The undead army thirsts for war and is always on standby. Father, as long as you give the order, we can go to Iradia at any time and let your enemies howl in the abyss. Is that so? Well done. Caesar was a little embarrassed and could only respond in this way. These guys were a little too overconfident. It was true that the number of undead was almost endless, but as a whole, they lacked real high-end strength. The skeletal dragon and the Black Knight had reached the peak. If this army was really placed in Iradia, it would not be enough for the countries in the north to chop them up. At the same time, without the accumulation of time, it was impossible to give birth to truly powerful and intelligent high-level undead. Perhaps Angramo was also aware of this point, but the undead's nature of hating the living could not be extinguished. They were so eager for war that even the skeletal dragon could not resist this primitive drive. At this time, if Caesar knew that the karmic dragon had published a set of sustainable development theories, he would definitely regret it. If the karmic dragon was in charge of the affairs of the Underdark, it would definitely find ways to maintain the balance between the undead and the monsters, and try its best to cultivate loyal native creatures of the Underdark that could show up in the surface world for Caesar to nourish Blackwing's nest. But if it was Angramo, the skeletal dragon would never care about the ecology of the native creatures, and there was no such idea in its mind at all. It would be good if it could follow the instructions of the Black Dragon Lord and not hurt them. It had been considering the war preparations of the undead army, and the resources of the Underdark were never tilted towards the native creatures. Of course, this was also what Caesar had expected before he left. For him, Blackwing's nest was the real core, and the Underdark was just a breeding ground for the secret undead army and a breeding ground for the logistics deployment. So, as long as Angramo could ensure the normal operation of the wild boar tribe, there was basically no problem. So next, Caesar went to see the Pavel and ordered him to increase the power and status of the wild boar tribe leader. He asked Angramo to assist him as much as possible and to send and suppress the skeletons for the wild boar tribe. This was because he saw that the wild boar tribe's breeding work had been done quite well recently. It could be said that it was in full swing, and it was better than the original orcs. Looking around, the huge horsegate lizards could be counted as a group. The growth cycle of the species of the Underdark was quite short. Chapter 154. Northeast of Iradia, the Elven Forest. This was a vast and boundless rainforest. Originally, there were tree shepherds and Taya elves who could control the growth of plants. Coupled with the blessing of the goddess of fertility, the growth of the plants in this area was astonishingly good, far surpassing that of the Green Capital. In the Elven Forest, almost every plant could break through the normal growth limit. Therefore, in this place, one could see jungle-like shrubs, wild growth, and a broadleaf forest that was dozens of meters tall. Vines that were thicker than pythons were entwined in the forest, and there were even dandelion seeds that were 30 centimeters in size, as well as fluffy leaves the size of a roof. This place was like a fairy tale world, a paradise for herbivores. Of course, it was also Luna's home. The little girl sat on the edge of a branch at the top of a giant tree, swinging her legs as she looked towards the west at the spreading forest in the distance. The sky was clear and peaceful as the sun shone through the layers of broadleaf forest, sprinkling fine colors. The flourishing snapdragons were bright red like fire, and the sunflowers were as brilliant as gold. Some of the trees were as large as a wall, covered with drought golden lotuses that carefully peeked around. This scene was too beautiful to take in, but she had already seen it for 25 days and was gradually getting tired of it. Just like most neutral intelligent species children, when Luna returned home, she immediately felt the incomparable warmth of her family. Her parents asked her about her well-being and cared for her. They were practically everywhere, asking her to tell them what she had seen and heard during her travels. But as time passed, this warmth gradually faded, and she became accustomed to it. Her days became dull and uneventful. Oh, phew. Luna tore the petal that was the same size as her into strips and threw it down. She lowered her head and watched the petals dance in the air. Then she also jumped down and floated along with the little white flower. When she reached the middle of the giant tree, Luna's figure twisted, and with a whoosh, she entered the secret tree hole of the fairy race, Tyrope's family. She told her parents about her plans to leave again. "My child," her father, Tyrope, after listening and thinking, said with a serious and loving tone, "Your suggestion really makes me feel pain. Child, you've only been home for less than 25 days, and now you're planning to leave us again." With that, Tyrope silently pursed her thin lips. Even though she was a male forest spirit, she still looked very handsome and feminine. No matter what, she couldn't assume a dignified posture. However, in the eyes of Luna, who had always been well-behaved, her father's words were hard to disobey. She could only turn her gaze to her mother for help, only to find that her mother, who had always doted on her, also had a troubled and unwilling expression on her face. This was very normal. According to the forest fairy's concept of time, 25 days was the same as how humans viewed 2.5 days. "Father," Luna bit her lip and said weakly, "I'm not going very far this time. I'm just outside the elven forest. I can return home at any time. Even in the periphery, it's still quite dangerous. Countless evil forces are spying on this place." Her mother, Balanwai, said with lingering fear, "Child, you don't know, but just a few days after you returned, there were actually bad seeds that snuck into the elven forest. Moreover, they were wandering around the area where the fairies lived. This gave me and your father a fright. At the time, we didn't dare to tell you, afraid that something would happen to you. I'm not that cowardly." Luna's small eyebrows scrunched together. Fortunately, the Lord Protector arrived in time and prevented these bad seeds from doing anything evil. Luna's mother patted her chest as if she had been frightened. This was an action that mother and daughter had inherited from the same lineage. "I'll be very careful," Luna said, and then showed the small necklace around her neck to her parents. "Look, I also obtained a magical item during my travels. It can protect me." Magical item. Her parents, however, did not react. Looking at the necklace, Tyrope only shook his head. "Child, you have to know that we don't need you to have any magical items, nor do we want you to travel the outside world and grow into a knowledgeable person. The forest fairies don't need these things. We only want you to be safe and happy and not be hurt." Her mother reached out a slender and delicate hand to hold her daughter's, using her warm and delicate palm to rub Luna's fingertips, just like when she was young. Fairies are the most inconspicuous race in Iradia. Our abilities are limited. Things like traveling and punishing evil are things that only elven rangers, chimeras, and giant eagles would consider. Did something happen? At this time, her father, Tyrope, suddenly asked. Noticing the hesitant and troubled expression on his daughter's face, he said gently, "Child, don't be afraid. Tell us if there's anything, and we'll think of a way for you." "No, no." Luna's fingers subconsciously shrank in her mother's hand, and she quickly shook her head. "How could anything happen to me?" Her parents were the most ordinary of forest fairies. They were diligent and simple, and had never left the elven forest in their lives, nor had they encountered any dangers. Luna didn't want to lie to them, but if she told her parents that she had raised a big evil dragon outside, she really didn't know what would happen next. "All right, if you insist." His father sighed and said, "Give me and your mother some time to discuss." In the small room in the tree hole, Luna's mother looked at Tyrope with a heavy expression. "There's a problem. If it was said that no one knew a son better than a mother, then no one knew a daughter better than a mother." In Caesar's words, Luna's silly and sweet personality could not hide from her parents at all. She was seen through at a glance. "What do you think we should do?" Luna's mother asked, and then tears began to fall. My poor child, she must have met some bad people and been forced by some hateful evil species. She even began to imagine some scenes of her daughter being enslaved. "No, if it's really as you say, those evil fellows wouldn't have let her go home at all. Tearope shook her head, denying her mother's wild thoughts. According to the genealogy records, there are very few fairies in history who can escape from the hands of the evil races. If our child really did escape, would she dare to leave the elven forest again? That was reasonable. Luna's mother couldn't help but think about it, and nodded. That seems to be the case. Tearope took out a small cup from the tree house, and then poured 2 drops of flower dew into it. She drank a mouthful and left 2 drops, so I guess this silly child probably made some friends outside. These young adventurers like to promise each other when they're parting and agree to go on an adventure together next time. Our child doesn't know how to refuse, so she agreed to it. It's not good for her to regret it afterwards, but now that the time is up, she can only fulfill the promise. That should be the case. This silly child. Luna's mother also nagged, and then asked, "Then what do we do now? What else can we do? You don't want our child to break her promise, right? I'll go visit the guardians later and see if any of them are willing to go on an adventure in the near future." Tearope said helplessly, "Let her become the servant of the elven ranger, the chimera, and the giant eagle. The journey will be safer if they go on a trip together. Also, take a look at her friends and help us check on them." Luna's mother thought about it and felt that it was reasonable. "Yes, it's really hard for you to go so far." As she said that, she became angry. "After this, we can't let this child be willful until she becomes an adult and becomes a partner." Chapter 155. Nero and his kin had already returned, but their numbers were much smaller. It was said that they were being hunted down by the native creatures of the elven forest, and had no choice but to return early. After this report was confirmed by the demon hound leader, Caesar recorded the information they had gathered, and then put it aside without any follow-up. After all, in the Black Dragon Lord's plan, the order of operations against the elven forest was behind the northern kingdoms, so Caesar did not care too much about the elven forest for now. The reason why he had ordered his kin to infiltrate was mainly to protect Luna, and at the same time, to do some simple intelligence gathering. They had returned, but the one Caesar was really waiting for, Hogg, who was in charge of capturing the goblins, and Gaul, who was in charge of searching for the Taurens, had not returned yet. Of course, Luna had not returned either. Humph! The black dragon snorted, lying in a pile of gold nests in the treasury, turned over, and stuck out his tongue, sucking all the gold coins in front of him into his mouth. After that, this fellow narrowed his eyes and took a few bites, and he swallowed all these shiny and good things. He enjoyed his life of sitting idly and eating, and he was satisfied to the point the scales on his entire body started to curl up and open up. No wonder these dragons like to collect treasures. It was so delicious. Caesar thought with a huff. As time passed, he gradually got used to eating metals, and now he was eating these treasures as snacks or even staple food. Furthermore, this damned black dragon had even figured out how to match the ingredients. For example, if gold and iron were eaten together, there would be a bitter taste. If mithril was mixed with a certain amount of copper, it would taste like chewing on a spicy strip. If gold and silver were eaten directly, it would taste like eating white chocolate. Anyway, it was delicious. Enough. I can't indulge in the days of eating treasures anymore. I have to use them to exchange for greater wealth. The black dragon shook his head in annoyance, made up his mind, and began to walk out. In the end, he grabbed a handful of gold and stuffed it into his mouth, and then firmly closed the door of the treasury. Recently, he had been working on changing the ecology of Blackwing's nest. Originally, the Black Dragon Lord's subordinates mostly relied on hunting and the supply of the Underdark for food, but this could not go on. He had been thinking about this hidden danger for a long time. After thinking for a while, Caesar decided to find another way out before the Taurens who had the talent for planting arrived. He lured a batch of high-quality newborn steel bulls and horn sheep from the wild boar people to use as seeds. He had his subordinates change from hunting to herding. The intelligent Shadow Manticore was in charge of this matter. The vast wilderness outside the Green Capital was the best prototype for a pasture. Of course, grazing in the wilderness was still in the experimental stage. It was just an experiment. Most of the resources were still in the Underdark. Because of the hot climate and the lack of water, every time the dry season came, there would be a severe drought in this place. It was difficult to provide high-quality and stable grassland. However, Caesar had a solution. Speaking of which, this was a suggestion that came out of the blue. Because it was a guard, the Dragonkin leader had the opportunity to hear the Black Dragon Lord's orders to the Manticore. After that, it carefully reminded its master that the Ankhegs were now under His Majesty's protection and were not afraid of their natural enemies. They could fully utilize their racial specialty, digging underground lakes in the distance between Blackwing's nest and the wilderness. When the time came, they could connect to the Green River for irrigation and store water during the rainy season, completely transforming the environment of the wilderness. This idea came from the Battle Lizardmen. The Dragonkin leader saw them diligently digging a channel from the Green River to the treetop fortress, creating a pool of water for them to breed and live in. For this reason, the Black Dragon Lord summoned the Ankheg tribe to ask about the possibility. After hearing the order, the Ankheg leader did not dare to lie and told the Black Dragon that this plan was feasible. However, it could be seen that the Ankheg leader was extremely reluctant. Even for the Ankhegs, whose racial talent was to create underground caves, the scale of such a project was huge. From the beginning of the project to the end, countless of their species would die in the deep underground, turning into bones that no one cared about. Unlike the gnolls, the Ankhegs were not evil creatures. Although they were also considered evil creatures, their abilities required them to work together, so they were quite close to each other. As the leader, of course, they did not want to see their people die in large numbers. It was only when the Black Dragon Lord nodded and promised that once the Ankhegs completed this project, they would be promoted to the ranks of the privileged clans. Only then did the Ankhegs become motivated, nodding and accepting the order and immediately starting to prepare. The reason why the Ankhegs were willing to sacrifice their lives for this promise was mainly because in Blackwing's nest, the privileges of the privileged clans were becoming clearer and clearer, and the difference between them and the ordinary clans was becoming more and more obvious. The Ankhegs could truly feel the difference in social class. For example, because most of the meat now came from the Underdark and was distributed by the Gnoll clans, there would be differences between the clans. Food for the privileged clans would definitely be guaranteed, but for the ordinary clans, apart from the Demonkin who were about to be promoted to the privileged clans, the other clans would be allocated relatively little food. They could only work harder to go out and hunt to replenish their food needs. In the Green Capital, which had been completely reformed, this was actually quite difficult. This was because the other clans absolutely could not touch Blackwing's nest. This was a red line, and if they stepped on it, they would be subjected to a torturous massacre. Most of the other beasts had been hunted to extinction when Blackwing's nest was first built. In addition, the new foreign clans like the Thorn Beasts and Kobolds belonged to the true bottom rung. They were not allocated any resources in Blackwing's nest, and were even exploited. The Grey Centaur clan had contributed greatly in the Battle of the Green Capital and had been promoted to the same status as the ordinary clans. This was a situation that the Black Dragon Lord had intentionally facilitated. To be honest, this kind of favoritism towards one clan and discriminating against the other had caused serious dissatisfaction among the ordinary clans in the beginning. Because of this, the hearts of the people in Blackwing's nest had wavered, and violent, bloody conflicts had even erupted. However, in the end, all of this was brutally suppressed by Hogg, who wielded the legendary weapon Bloodthirst, and used blood as a warning. This was the monster clans. Before they were completely domesticated, they could not abide by the rules of humans and would erupt into chaos at the slightest provocation. Not only now, but even in the days to come, when Blackwing's nest was steadily expanding, there would be no lack of internal conflicts of all sizes. Caesar had long since gotten used to it. On the external side, the benefits of the Black Dragon Lord's behind-the-scenes control of the northern countries, Khaki Hill, were gradually beginning to show. One must know that in the human world, 99% of the problems could be solved with money. If it could not be solved, first consider whether there was not enough money, and then consider other problems. It just so happened that Caesar was now rich, and he was willing to spend it. Therefore, Blackwing's Nest was in charge of providing the money, and Khaki Hill was in charge of recruiting craftsmen, and the entire business was proceeding smoothly. Now, in the hinterland of Khaki Hill, there were already more than hundreds of armorsmiths gathered together, and they began to forge weapons and armor specially made for the orcs and gray centaurs. The first batch of goods was expected to be delivered in a month's time. As for the design of the canine demon clan's weapons and equipment, the Black Dragon Lord borrowed money from Brendel's family to contact the reclusive Black Castle Dwarves, and the Dwarven Masters were responsible for the design and customization. Although Caesar's unusual methods of doing things were somewhat concealed, it still attracted the attention of some people. Of course, this was also related to the fact that Caesar did not have strict requirements in this regard, because he knew that it was only a matter of time before the shapeshifters were exposed. With the death of all the members of the real Brendel family, their loyal subordinates would sooner or later discover that the restrictions on them had disappeared. This was something that could not be hidden. Of course, those soldiers would not publicize anything. The real impact was that once the shapeshifters were injured and killed, their innate abilities would be ineffective, and they would inevitably be exposed. And now, the situation in the northern countries was turbulent. Based on the current situation, Grand Duke Lionheart was gritting his teeth and preparing for a second Rhine civil war at any time. As the Lord of Khaki, if Brindle did not want to surrender his territory, he would have to go to the battlefield. And if he went to the battlefield, he could die, and if he died, he would be exposed. Therefore, time was still quite tight. Caesar felt that instead of spending time and effort to keep it a secret, it was better to let the shapeshifters have a certain amount of cover to increase their efficiency as much as possible, and use all the available resources in the shortest time possible to pour into Blackwing's Nest. When the time came for a real war, the Black Dragon Lord, who had already tasted the benefits of controlling the human race, would not easily give up this colony and would definitely participate in the war. And once he joined the war, this war would change. It would no longer be a civil war in Rhine, but a war between Blackwing's Nest and the northern countries. So during this period, Caesar, the Black Dragon Lord, could eat, drink, and slack off, but as his kin, he could not stop for a moment. Chapter 156. Luna shuttled through the forest with a smile on her face as she bypassed the entwined hedges and passed through the pink and white flowers peeking out of the hedges. She was in a very good mood. Earlier in the morning, her father finally relented and agreed to let Luna go out again. With her parents' agreement, the little one finally heaved a sigh of relief. After that, Luna spent some time walking around the Fae's residence, saying goodbye to her new friends, flowers, vines, and trees one by one. After that, she returned to the starting point, intending to stay with her parents for one last time before leaving the elven forest. Luna found the ancient tree where her family lived and flew up. Soon, she reached the middle section and arrived at the door. The entrance to the Fae's residence was a small wooden gate. The hinges were made of twigs and branches, and the gate was made of vines and sharpened wood. Of course, such a small gate did not have the ability to resist external forces. However, in the elven forest, this small wooden gate had a special meaning. It meant that the forest fae lived inside, and not animals like squirrels and tree owls. The little one stretched out her hand and pushed gently, and the gate opened. The layout of Tylope's house was divided into 3 levels. The lowest level was the storeroom, where various old things that her parents did not want to throw away were piled up. The level at the entrance was used as the living room to entertain friends. Further up, there were some small rooms that were separated. Those were Luna and her parents' bedrooms. When the Fae built the house, in order not to damage the life of the tree, they would generally not hollow out the inside. They would only find a suitable place and dig out some of the tree material from the edge. Because the elven forest vegetation grew at an extremely large scale, such a space was enough for the Fae. As long as they maintained a stabilizing spell, the house would not be swallowed up by the tree's recovery. Luna saw her parents sitting on small chairs as soon as she entered the house. "You're back." Her father turned his gaze and said something of a greeting. The little one nodded and did not say anything. In the elven forest, it was rare for a fae to be allowed to travel before reaching adulthood. Compared to the other fae's family, her parents were quite tolerant. Looking at her silent daughter, Luna's mother held back for a while. She could not help but ask her directly, "Silly child, when are you coming back this time?" "Very soon," Luna said timidly. "The place I'm going to is not far from the elven forest. I should be able to come back every 2 or 3 months. If possible, it might be even longer. Remember to be careful," Luna's mother said. "You have to be careful when you're outside. I heard that there are no forest fairies outside of the elven forest. It's too dangerous." "I will," Luna whispered. His father, Tylope, had been silent all this time. He pursed his lips and finally opened his mouth. "Your mother prepared some food for you and some small coins in the bag you brought back. I don't know if we can use it outside. Take it with you." "Okay. Also, we found a companion for you. Lord Maxier has agreed to take care of you and bring you along." "Yes." The little guy continued to nod and only reacted after 2 seconds. "Huh." She was originally quite touched, but now she was stunned and said in shock, "Lord Maxil?" "Yes." Luna's mother nodded. "You really don't know how to behave. Your father specially went to the Guardian's residence to ask about your matter. Finally, Lord Maxier has said that he plans to go out for a walk. After knowing about our situation, he didn't mind the trouble and is willing to take you along." "Wait." Luna hurriedly waved her hand. She thought for a while and asked carefully, "What is Maxier?" "You child, you can't be so rude outside. The Guardians protect the elven forest and bleed for our safety. Can't you call them Lord?" Her father first sternly reprimanded her, then his tone softened. "Lord Maxier is a chimera." At this time, Tylope looked at the sky through the wall window. "It's about time. That lord shouldn't be late. I'll go out and take a look." As he spoke, he flapped his transparent wings that were wider than the female fairies and prepared to go out. "I'll go with you." Luna hurriedly stood up. The place she wanted to return to was Blackwing's nest, the territory of a big, evil dragon. How could you bring a kind race there? She was thinking about how to refuse, but when she opened the door of the tree hole, she saw a huge monster that occupied her entire field of vision. Chimera. If this name was translated in modern terms, it should be chimera. They were not native to Iradia, but monsters completely created by the gods. It was worth mentioning that other intelligent races had some misunderstandings about chimeras. The humans in Iradia had seen too many chimeras and subconsciously thought that all chimeras were an evil tribe. To the creatures in the elven forest, they subconsciously thought that chimeras were all kind creatures. This was actually a wrong and one-sided view. Just like how there were good Taya elves and evil night elves among the elves, there were also differences between chimeras. These chimeras were actually created by the 2 goddesses, Serene and Shar, and had a strong alignment. The chimeras created by Shar belonged to the evil alignment. They were all 2-headed monsters with a lion's head, a goat's body, and a snake's tail. They had sharp claws and purple scales, and they also had a pair of dragon-like wings. Like real dragons, they relied on levitation to fly and use their wings to adjust their direction. The chimeras created by Serene, the moon goddess, were actually kind creatures. Because of the later generations, the moon goddess simply used the evil chimeras as a template. They were 2-headed monsters with a goat's body and a snake's tail. They had claws and wings, but their heads were more like real dragons. They had no scales, only rough and wrinkled skin. In Elven Forest, there were a large number of chimeras of the good alignment created by the moon goddess. However, no matter which faction the chimeras belonged to, they were all extremely ugly. It was likely that when creating these chimeras, the 2 goddesses had only considered their combat capabilities and had never thought of giving these chimeras a certain degree of beauty. Although they were also archenemies when it came to the design concept of creating the lower class, they were completely inferior to the Platinum Dragon God and the Evil Dragon Mother. It should be noted that the majestic Gold Dragon and the ferocious Red Dragon were both popular. Because of their valiant strength and eye-catching appearance, they were respectively the representatives and leaders of their respective camps. Chapter 157. Why aren't they back yet? The black dragon stood up on his hind legs and looked into the distance. He bared his teeth and thought angrily. From his nose, two long and thick streams of white smoke were exhaled. His body was like a burning furnace. Speaking of which, this guy had become more and more tired and irritable in the past few days. This was because the genetic enhancement drug type 3 attached to the Crimson Gold reward had provided Caesar with enough nourishment. The black dragon's body had been nourished, and it couldn't wait to enter a new round of hibernation. However, Caesar's willpower was in conflict with his body's reaction, so he was becoming more and more irritable. Ever since the transformation of his body in the Underdark, the black dragon hadn't fallen into a long hibernation period. It had been a full 7 years since then. In Iradia, there were no true dragons that were as active as he was during his teenage years. Even the most powerful red dragon, Kuingugios, spent most of his teenage years in hibernation. There were very few records of the red dragon going out during his teenage years. However, to say that Caesar was one of a kind wasn't the case. In the millions of years of history of the dragon species, there was no lack of freaks. In the outer world far away from Eladia, there was a white dragon known as Frostwing, mad clamor that was famous for its magical fetishes and strange evilness. It was also very active in its youth. However, the white dragon's whereabouts were uncertain recently, and it rarely sent any news to the outside world. Of course, because the black dragon wasn't powerful enough at the moment, Caesar didn't know about the existence of those abnormal dragon bodies. Besides, even if he did know, he wouldn't be able to come into contact with them. The reason he was so angry at this moment was that he was extremely sleepy, but he had to force himself to stay awake and wait patiently for his family to return. After all, only when Hogg, Gull, and Luna returned and settled the work of the goblins and minotaurs, as well as when Hogg took over the management of the goblins and minotaurs. Only then could Caesar enter a long hibernation with peace of mind. However, until now, Hogg, Gull, and Luna still hadn't returned to Blackwing's nest. Not even their shadows could be seen. Let these guys be captured by the demons. That way, I won't have to worry about them. Caesar cursed angrily. He lowered his body and walked forward. Of course, Mr. Tylope. Seeing the fairy come out of the small treehouse, the two-headed chimera revealed a smile. Although its body was that of a monster and its appearance was extremely ugly, its eyes and tone were very gentle. Greetings, Lord Magishill. It was obvious that the chimera had been waiting here. Luna's father bowed slightly, thanking the chimera for its patience and kindness. But it's so ugly. Luna raised her head and looked at the chimera that was over 10 meters long. Although she was also a member of the Elven Forest, she had seen chimeras before and didn't think much of them. But this time, she didn't know why, but when she saw the chimera, Luna felt that they were ugly to the point of being deformed. She felt that it was a far cry from the big black dragon. The chimera looked at her curiously and carefully, then turned his head and said to Luna's father, "This is your child?" It's hard to imagine that a child of the forest would have such a strong interest in traveling. I made a fool of myself in front of you. Tylope smiled awkwardly, then pulled Luna forward and introduced her. This is my daughter, Luna Branwell Tylope of Caniston Lavender Clepithiastinio. Tylope spoke smoothly, and the chimera didn't interrupt him. It patiently waited for him to finish reading her name, then nodded to the fairy girl. Greetings, Miss Luna. Lord Magishill, greetings. Thinking of her father's warning, Luna couldn't help but address him as such. She then hurriedly said, Actually, there's no need to trouble you. The place I'm going to is very close. It's less than a day's journey from the elven forest. This explanation was actually a veiled refusal. Luna really didn't want to go with this chimera. If she really let it go to Blackwing's nest with her, it would probably die. It would really die. Luna knew what kind of character her big black dragon had. Unfortunately, the chimera didn't understand the meaning of the fairy's words at all. It thought that she was being sensitive and shy. It heard that the forest fairies were as curious and timid as cats when they were young. So Magus Hill smiled warmly and said, "It's all right. Since it's only a day's journey, it won't be a problem. All the more reason I should send you along. Protecting the weak is the duty of all guardians." But it's still so ugly, seeing it speak with such confidence. Luna's mind once again had this thought. Besides, I'm also going to the outside world to investigate. I heard from my fellow guardians that something big happened in the western forest adjacent to us. A powerful black dragon has either imprisoned or killed an old green dragon, and it's quite famous. I heard that the humans in the northern kingdoms call it the Dragon King. I'm very interested in that place and want to take a look. Then you have to be careful. Luna's father had a worried expression after hearing this. Almost no fairies had ever seen a real evil dragon, but just this name alone was no less than a natural disaster to them. "I will," Magus Hill replied, and changed the topic to the fairy girl. "Miss Luna, I don't know which direction you're heading in. I think I should send you safely there before heading to that forest." "That's the western forest." Luna felt a little awkward. What a wonderful coincidence. Magus Hill smiled. "We're heading in the same direction." "Yes, that's indeed the case." Mr. Tierrope interrupted. This father was in a good mood. It seemed that his daughter's contact with the guardians was going smoothly. But it wasn't surprising. The creatures of the elven forest would definitely have a good impression of the powerful and gentle chimera. At the same time, Lord Magus Hill was still young, so his daughter should be able to chat with it on the way. So Tierrope went with the flow and said, "My lord, we've already packed the child's luggage. You can leave at any time. What do you think?" Miss Luna, although its appearance was deformed, the chimera was still graceful and courteous. It first asked the fairy girl, "Oh, all right." Luna's little face scrunched up. She hesitated and agreed. She wasn't good at rejecting others. Moreover, this chimera's goal was Blackwing's nest. She couldn't be considered tricking it, right? Chapter 158. Miss Luna, are you sure you want to come to This Is the Place? The chimera, Magusher, remained vigilant, carefully crossing the gully under its feet. It did not dare to fly and tried to make as little noise as possible while asking the fairy girl in front of it. "Yes, my lord." Luna turned her head to answer it. Her voice was calm and her expression was tranquil. "But it's dangerous here." As a chimera created by the moon god Serene, although Magusher was not as powerful as the ancestral chimera, its abilities were not bad. It was more balanced in all aspects and had a certain level of perception. In the short 20 minutes since stepping into the green field, it had sensed at least 4 pairs of eyes that were filled with malice. Magusher was sure that those were the eyes of evil creatures. But for some reason, those eyes disappeared in the end. Nothing jumped out to make waves, allowing it and the little fairy to enter the green field smoothly. Of course, as a member of the Guardians of the Elven Forest, Magus Hill had the ability to rush out and ferret out those guys who were spying on them in the dark to see what they were. But the chimera did not do that. One had to know that it was best not to act rashly in a completely unfamiliar environment before having enough confidence. This sentence came from the mouth of a human adventurer, but it was equally applicable to all creatures. In response to the chimera's reminder, Luna could only remain silent. She did not know how to tell Magusher that this was the Blackwing's nest that it had originally planned to secretly visit. If it was lucky, it might be able to directly meet the Dragon King, the Black Dragon Lord, Caesar Tangerine. "Lord Magusher, I'm sorry to trouble you to send me here. I think that I have arrived at my destination, so I won't take up any more of your time. On behalf of the fairy race, I would like to express my gratitude to you." "Thank you." Luna made a final effort to persuade the chimera to leave. In fact, since entering the green field and reaching the periphery of the Blackwing's nest, she had already begun to say this. Now, she had repeated this no less than 3 times. "Please don't say that, Miss Luna. I promised your father that I would bring you to your friend. As the guardians of the elven forest, we will never break our promises." Magus Hill shook his head and gently refused. He then said, "Actually, I'm very interested in your friend. I want to see if there are any kind creatures outside of the elven forest who can become friends with the forest fairies. Moreover, this place is not safe. Even I have to be extremely careful and cautious. If you don't have any protection, it's very easy for you to be in danger." There was no other way. Luna sighed in her heart. Actually, from the Chimera's point of view, everything Magusher did was reasonable and in line with the model of the good faction. He was enthusiastic, abiding by his promises, and patient. There was no fault to be found, unless he told the dragon that his destination was Blackwing's nest and that he was prepared to meet a great evil dragon. Only then would the dragon change its mind. But could he say it? Once the Chimera found out, it would definitely return immediately and inform the other guardians of the elven forest. It would also send a message to its parents. Even with Luna's small brain, she could imagine how things would develop. If this continued, things would become extremely bad. So, the little fellow was very depressed now. She really could not think of a way to get rid of the Chimera. In the end, she decided not to think about this problem anymore. She brought Magusher along and entered the interior of Blackwing's nest. The little fellow was very familiar with this place. When the Black Dragon Lord was not accompanying her, Luna would call the husky over and let the leader of the dragon descendants bring her around. With a curious gaze, she would look at the interesting living conditions of the various clans. So, the little fellow had a basic understanding of the locations of the various clans in Blackwing's nest. She was even more familiar with it than Caesar. She brought the Chimera through the forest. In order to avoid conflict, she deliberately avoided the clan's residences and slowly approached the treetop fortress. Of course, the forces under the Black Dragon Lord were tangled and intertwined. Blackwing's nest had also been renovated by Caesar some time ago, and many places had changed. So, it was inevitable that they would be discovered. However, Miss Luna's position in Blackwing's nest was even higher than that of the Black Dragon Lord's daughter, Angramo. Moreover, the little fairy would run around when she had nothing better to do. So, all the clans in Blackwing's nest knew this young miss, and no one dared to jump out and obstruct her. In this way, the Chimera was able to smoothly pass through most of Blackwing's nest, avoiding the various clans' residences and entering the true core. After a long time, Magusher followed behind little Luna and emerged from the dense thorny bushes. Before it could even look around, it heard an ear-piercing cry. That sound was very unpleasant, hoarse and sharp, as if it wanted to pierce its eardrums. This was the core area of Blackwing's nest, close to the treetop fortress where the Black Dragon Lord resided. It was an isolation zone that was closely monitored by the descendants of the dragons. Magusher was immediately discovered the moment it showed its head. The wyverns cried out and quickly gathered together. They began to dive downwards, preparing to attack. Although it was nervous, the Chimera still steadied itself. After sensing danger, it stood still and looked up at the wyverns that were gathering together. Relying on a levitation spell, it left the ground. Its 2 dragon-like heads let out deep breaths, each swallowing acid and lightning as it prepared for battle. However, something unexpected happened. The wyvern's dive was only halfway through when they immediately stopped in midair. Then, they let out 2 unclear whimpers and flapped their wings, flying away as if nothing had happened. What's going on? Magoo Hill was puzzled. It had been prepared to engage in a bloody battle, but the wyverns had actually fled with a whimper. How could these evil descendants be so cowardly? Not a single one of them could fight. Of course, the Chimera did not chase after them. It suppressed its nature of punishing evil. It was not wise to start a battle with a large number of enemies. Moreover, it had a companion by its side that needed its protection. Of course, the the chimera still had a large degree of doubt about the wyvern's retreating without a fight. However, when it raised its head and looked around, the doubt that had just risen was immediately replaced by a huge shock. What entered its eyes was a fortress made of 4 or 5 giant ancient trees intertwined together. The walls were covered with sharp thorns, and above the center of it stood a majestic palace. It was built with a material that resembled glass and crystal. The entire structure shone brightly, as if it was a shining gem. The chimera was not a fool. On the contrary, as a chimera created by the sister goddess, its intelligence might be higher than the native species like Iradia. Therefore, with just a glance, Magusher immediately realized that something was wrong. Although it had never been to Blackwing's nest and did not know where the so-called Dragon King lived, the hideous castle and emerald palace in front of it was definitely not a place that ordinary people could live in. Thinking of the dragon descendant that it had caught a glimpse of, Magusher immediately deduced that this was very likely the nest of an evil dragon, and it was located in the west. This was very likely the nest of the famous black dragon from a few days ago. Oh no! After coming to this conclusion, Magusher's heart throbbed violently. It made a prompt decision and immediately stretched out its claws, wanting to pull the fairy away. At the same time, it said in a low voice, "Miss Luna, this place is very dangerous. We can't stay here any longer. We have to leave immediately." At this moment, Caesar had just climbed out of the Emerald Palace. Chapter 159. The chimera extended its claws forward. It had judged that this place was extremely dangerous and wanted to flee with the forest sprite. However, from the perspective of Caesar, who had just crawled out of the Emerald Palace, the chimera's actions were as if it was trying to grab little Luna. This fellow was instantly enraged. A storm surged, and the draconic aura surged forth like a raging wave. The chimera's heart skipped a beat, and it instinctively looked up. The scene before it was as if it was standing at the mouth of a volcano, witnessing an eruption. It did not even have the time to identify what it was before it was right in front of it. The chimera wanted to retreat, but it was already too late. The furious Caesar, under the dual effects of the Crimson Heart and active hormones, had already surpassed its original limits. It could be said that he arrived in the blink of an eye, and could rely on his powerful strength to suppress the inertia and twist his body. In the next second, the chimera's right forelimb that it had extended in an attempt to flee with the forest sprite was completely torn off. Green blood immediately splattered everywhere. However, the chimera only had time to let out a short howl of pain before it was immediately forced back into its stomach. This was because a huge claw had grabbed its throat. Next, an unprecedented force dragged it into the air. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, an irresistible force wrapped around the chimera, forcefully crashing into the thick trunk of a large tree nearby. Accompanied by the wails of blood and bones, the entire tree exploded with a loud bang. Wood shavings and broken branches swirled in the air, and the upper layer of the tree toppled down with a muffled sound. Immediately after, the chimera was forcefully dragged along by the violent black dragon. As the world spun around it, it was ruthlessly slammed into the ground, kicking up a large cloud of dust before the tree toppled over. It was only then that the chimera finally had the chance to let out an uncontrollable cry of pain. It felt as if all the bones in its body were about to shatter. Asterisk roar. Asterisk, it was only at this moment that the culprit that had attacked the chimera let out a terrifying roar. The sound was deafening, reverberating in the green wilderness. It made the entire Blackwing's nest uneasy and restless. Shaken by the roar that could pierce metal and shatter stone, the chimera finally recovered from its daze. To be honest, it had been beaten into a daze by the storm of attacks. Its mind was completely blank, and even its tragic howls and painful struggles were an instinctive reaction to the intense pain in its body. It was only now that its mind gradually regained clarity. The pitiful chimera arched its back, trying its best to raise its head and widen its eyes. It wanted to see clearly what the fellow who had beaten it to the point of being unable to retaliate was. This flourishing age was just as it wished. What came into view was a terrifyingly strong black dragon. That fellow's body was not long, only 16 meters, which was equivalent to the standard of a black dragon in its prime. However, that fellow looked even more ferocious than the head of the 5 color dragons, the red dragon. Its physique was thicker and stronger than any other true dragon had ever seen. Its muscles were knotted together, making it stand out from the masses. Its thick and short neck gave it a ferocious aura. Magus Hill couldn't help but wonder if this creature had undergone a massive growth process like the plants in the elven forest. What was even more ridiculous was that the other party was wearing something that looked like armor. However, Magus Hill had never seen armor like that before. It seemed to grow from the body from the inside out. The black dragon's eyes were deep red. He glared at it, violent flames surging in his pupils, and then he bared his fangs. Wait a minute. At this moment, Luna finally reacted. Before the Black Dragon Lord could crush the Chimera's head, she quickly stopped him. No! As she spoke, she hurriedly ran over and hugged Caesar's tail with all her might. To Magus Hill's surprise, the ferocious black dragon actually stopped. It seemed to have heard the fairy girl's scolding. In its opinion, it was a scolding, and its expression changed. Following that, the evil dragon released the front claws of the injured chimera and stood up on its hind legs. First, it stepped on Magus Hill's body with one of its hind legs. At the same time, it slowly turned its head to look at the forest fairy that was holding onto its tail. Oh no! Miss Luna had attracted its attention. This evil dragon was going to attack the kind and weak forest fairy. Magus Hill subconsciously thought that he had promised Mr. Tearope to protect his daughter. The current situation was not something he could accept. Thus, the chimera began to struggle with all its strength. However, the other party's strength was like an insurmountable mountain, firmly stomping it into the dust and unable to move at all. Damn it! I'm sorry, Mr. Tearope. I may not be able to fulfill my promise. The guardian Magus Hill was unable to protect Miss Luna. As the price, let me also... Magus Hill was concentrating on his last words. However, he saw that the black dragon did not slap Miss Luna into meat paste as he had imagined. Instead, it skillfully extended its claws with its palms facing upwards and waited quietly. In the next second, the forest fairy sat on it very naturally. Did you miss me? It heard the fairy girl's affectionate voice ask. Magus Hill instantly fell into a state of confusion. Even his broken limb did not hurt as much. What did Miss Luna say? He could not help but wonder if he was in a trance due to his heavy injuries and had begun to hallucinate. What was even more ridiculous was that the ugly and ferocious black dragon actually responded to her. Not all. After seeing that the little fellow was unharmed, the black dragon lord pursed his lips and replied. At the same time, the violent flames in his eyes gradually extinguished. After that, Caesar looked at Magus Hill, who was under his feet. He kicked him twice before asking, "What kind of monster is this? It seemed like it wanted to catch you just now." No. It's not like that. Although it looked ugly, Luna felt that Magus Hill was quite kind. Thus, she explained, Lord Magus Hill is a chimera descendant, a member of the guardian army of the Elven Forest. My parents were worried that I would meet with danger outside. Luna told Caesar the whole story of the matter from beginning to end. Iradia's chimera is even uglier than I thought. Caesar scratched his chin and kicked the silent Magus Hill. So, this monster is actually a fellow of the good camp? The creatures of the Elven Forest are all kind. Okay? The little fellow nodded and muttered. At the same time, she noticed the chimera's situation and said, "Also, Caesar, can you let it go first?" Due to the pain and blood loss, Magus Hill had lost a lot of strength and was about to faint. "But I can." The black dragon moved his foot away. "But this fellow can't be let go. According to what you said, it's a member of the guardian army of the Elven Forest. It also discovered our relationship. If I let it go, it will cause trouble for me." "What relationship?" Luna's focus was a little strange. Enslavement. You have signed a contract. Unless I agree, you can't leave before I have the ability to sense things. Oh, damn it. Chapter 160. If that's the case, cough cough. Mr. Magusher, I'm sorry. Caesar let go of the chimera beneath his feet. Its severed limb was slowly stopping bleeding. To a chimera, such an injury was serious, but it was not unbearable. After all, they were created as weapons of war. When the twin sisters created them, they gave the chimera a self-healing ability that was far superior to that of Iradia's native species. In other words, as long as the chimera did not receive any additional damage, it would have a high chance of regrowing its severed limb as long as it maintained a constant supply of nutrients and energy and rested well. Caesar did not intend to kill Magusher directly. Although the Pinochet dragons were all vicious and cruel, this fellow's way of doing things was different. Towards intelligent life forms that did not have any conflicts of interest or emotional entanglements, Caesar could maintain a certain degree of calmness. Although this fellow had been very irritable and had a bad temper recently due to the constant conflict between its mental will and physical reactions, to be honest, the Chimera Magusher had kindly sent the little fairy back. It would be unreasonable and inappropriate to kill this fellow just because it knew the location of the treetop fortress and some small secrets. Even if he was concerned about the relationship with the little fellow, Caesar could not kill the chimera. Moreover, as neighbors, Blackwing's nest would inevitably have to deal with the elven forest in the future. The Black Dragon Lord was not a war maniac. If he could use some conciliatory means to get in touch with the elven forest, Caesar would naturally be more than happy to do so. Although at first glance, the Pinochet dragons and the fellows of the elven forest seemed to be natural enemies, if the kind races were really as gentle and intelligent as the rumors said, then Caesar felt that it would not be difficult to get in touch with them. Roar. Evil dragon. Hearing the words slave and contract, Magusher subconsciously imagined the inhumane actions of this damned black dragon. Therefore, when the Black Dragon Lord moved away and stepped on its hind legs, the chimera was filled with energy for some reason. It immediately bared its fangs and prepared to resist violently. In the end, it was once again easily pressed back into the ground by the Black Dragon. Look, Caesar pressed down on the struggling chimera with one claw and said to the little fellow sitting in the other claw, "It seems that the kind fellows are paranoid. I apologize, but they still want to fight me. You were the one who attacked first without any reason." Even if little Luna had always been on the side of her big, stupid dragon, Caesar's words were righteous. The forest fairy could not help but grumble in her heart. After that, she jumped down from the black dragon's claws and flew to the chimera. Lord Magus I'm really sorry, but please calm down for a moment. Caesar is different from the other Pinochet dragons. He's not a bad guy who's so bad that he oozes pus. Luna's words were sincere. From her point of view, the Black Dragon Caesar was calm and had style. He was not greedy for money or bloodthirsty, completely different from the other chromatic dragons. He would not harm other creatures for no reason, and he was rather emotional. In her eyes, Caesar was a good guy. Unfortunately, this was only the forest fairy's personal opinion. The clans under Blackwing's nest did not think so. In their understanding, the Black Dragon Lord was not only not gentle, but was rather fierce and cruel. He would not tolerate the slightest disobedience, and the slightest violation of his prohibitions would cause the Black Dragon Lord to start a bloody massacre. He was an extremely terrifying dictator. However, all in all, Caesar was indeed quite different from the other chromatic dragons. If one looked at this guy's logic and way of doing things, this Black Dragon's camp seemed to be a little skewed, and he was more like a creature of the neutral camp. Faction deviation was something that was very likely to happen in Eladia. Furthermore, such cases were quite common. Throughout history, there were many creatures that people were familiar with, such as the succubus paladins, the fallen heavens race, and so on. They were all strange products of faction deviation. Even among the lazy, greedy, and cruel chromatic dragons. There were strange existences that worshipped the platinum dragon god, Bahamut. In Eladia, there's an extremely famous and important spell that was used to determine whether one was a friend or foe. It was called alignment verification. This spell was naturally blessed by the gods, so it was very powerful. It could determine a creature's alignment based on its way of doing things and logic. Unfortunately, among the guardians of the elven forest, only the Chimera Magushar was here, and he did not know this effective spell. Otherwise, he could have tried to determine the Black Dragon Lord's camp. Of course, it did not matter now, because Luna was endorsing the Black Dragon Lord. Magushar felt that, as a fairy living together in the elven forest, he could still trust her. Thus, this guy gave up on the idea of attacking again. After Caesar withdrew his claws, he stood up shakily, his broken right forelimb a little shocking. "I apologize again, Mr. Magushar," Caesar said casually. "Miss Luna, the friend your parents mentioned, could it be this dragon?" Magushar did not respond to the black dragon's words, and instead asked the little fellow. Although his tone was not very good, he did not call Caesar an evil dragon in the end. Speaking of which, after being beaten up by a dragon for no reason and having its forelimbs broken, it would be impossible for anyone to maintain a good mental state. It was already good enough that it didn't go berserk. On this point, at least the Chimera still maintained its gentle personality from before. The reason why he did not call Caesar an evil dragon again was firstly because of the fairy girl's words, and secondly because of the teachings of the elders in the Guardian troop. Their leader told the Guardians that before they had enough understanding of an unfamiliar creature, they should not easily label it as an evil dragon. That would affect their own subjective judgment and was not in line with the Guardian's teachings. Although Magushar was not a powerful Guardian, his attitude in all aspects was still up to standard. Although he was angry with the Black Dragon Lord, he did not hate Caesar because of this. Therefore, at this moment, the Chimera finally endured the pain and turned around to look at the Black Dragon Lord, trying to maintain its calm, and said, "Hello, the legendary Dragon King." "Hello, Mr. Chimera. It seems that what happened just now was not a beautiful misunderstanding. I apologize for the third time," Caesar said, but at the same time, he muttered in his heart, "Dragon King? Who the hell gave him this name? Did they not want him to die quickly enough? They better not let him find out who gave him this name, or else he would definitely skin that guy alive and hang him. I accept your apology and will not pursue this matter any further," the Chimera said. No emotions could be heard in its voice. "My mission is to send Miss Luna to her destination and wait for her to meet her friend. Since you are her friend, then I think my mission has been completed. Please allow me to take my leave." I'm afraid that won't do. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.